Book 4 Chap. I. Dynasties of Kings. Origin of the Solar Dynasty from Brahma. Sons of the Manu Vaivaswata. Transformations of Ila or Sudama. Descendants of the sons of Vaivaswat. Those of Nidishta. Greatness of Maratha. Kings of Vaisali. Descendants of Saryati. Legend of Rayavata. His daughter Revati married to Balarama. Maitreya. Venerable Preceptor, you have explained to me the perpetual and occasional ceremonies which are to be performed by those righteous individuals who are diligent in their devotions, and you have also described to me the duties which devolve upon the several castes, and on the different orders of the human race. I have now to request you will relate to me the dynasties of the kings who have ruled over the earth. Parasara, I will repeat to you, Maitreya, an account of the family of Manu, commencing with Brahma, and graced by a number of religious, magnanimous, and heroic princes, of which it is said, the lineage of him shall never be extinct, who daily calls to mind the race of Manu, originating with Brahma. Listen therefore, Maitreya, to the entire series of the princes of this family, by which all sin shall be effaced. Before the evolution of the mundane egg, existed Brahma, who was Hiranyagarbha, the form of that supreme Brahma which consists of Vishnu as identical with the Rig, Yajur, and Samvedas, the primeval, uncreated cause of all worlds. From the right thumb of Brahma was born the patriarch Daksha. His daughter was Aditi, who was the mother of the sun. The Manu Vaivaswata was the son of the celestial luminary, and his sons were Ikshwaku, Nriga, Drishta, Saryati, Narishayanta, Branzu, Nabhaga, Nidishta, Karashur, and Prishadra. Before their birth, the Manu, being desirous of sons, offered a sacrifice for that purpose to Mitra and Varuna, but the rite being deranged, through an irregularity of the ministering priest, a daughter, Ila, was produced. Through the favor of the two divinities, however, her sex was changed, and she became a man, named Sudama. At a subsequent period, in consequence of becoming subject to the effects of a malediction once pronounced by Shiva, Sudama was again transformed to a woman in the vicinity of the hermitage of Buddha, the son of the deity of the moon. Buddha saw and espoused her, and had by her a son named Puravas. After his birth, the illustrious rishis, desirous of restoring Sudama to his sex, prayed to the mighty Vishnu, who is the essence of the four Vedas, of mind, of everything, and of nothing, and who is in the form of the sacrificial male, and through his favor Ila once more became Sudama, in which character he had three sons, Udgala, Gaya, and Vinata. In consequence of his having been formerly a female, Sudama was excluded from any share in his paternal dominions, but his father, at the suggestion of Vasishta, bestowed upon him the city Pratishtana, and he gave it to Puravas. Of the other sons of the Manu, Prishadra, in consequence of the crime of killing a cow, was degraded to the condition of a Sudra. From Karashur descended the mighty warriors termed Karashas, the sovereigns of the north. The son of Nidishta, named Nabhaga, became a Vaisya. His son was Balandana, whose son was the celebrated Vatsapri. His son was Pransu, whose son was Prajani, whose son was Kanitra, whose son was the very valiant Chakshhupa, whose son was Vinza, whose son was Vivansati, whose son was Kanintra, whose son was the powerful, wealthy, and valiant Karandama, whose son was Avikshi, or Avikshit, whose son was the mighty Maratha, of whom this well-known verse is recited. There never was beheld on earth a sacrifice equal to the sacrifice of Maruta. All the implements and utensils were made of gold. Indra was intoxicated with the libations of Soma juice, and the Brahmins were enraptured with the magnificent donations they received. The winds of heaven encompassed the right as guards, and the assembled gods attended to behold it. Maruta was a Chakravarti, or universal monarch. He had a son named Narashayanta, his son was Dhamma, his son was Rajavardhana, his son was Sudrati, his son was Nara, his son was Kavala, his son was Bandhumat, his son was Bhagavat, his son was Buddha, his son was Trinavindu, who had a daughter named Ilavla. The celestial nymph Alambashur, becoming enamored of Trinavindu, bore him a son named Visala, by whom the city Vaisali was founded. The son of the first king of Vaisali was Hemakandra, his son was Satchandra, his son was Tamraswa, his son was Srinjaya, his son was Sahadeva, his son was Krisaswa, his son was Somadatta, who celebrated 10 times the sacrifice of a horse, his son was Janamjaya, and his son was Sumati. These were the kings of Vaisali, of whom is said, by the favor of Trinavindu all the monarchs of Vaisali were long-lived, magnanimous, equitable, and valiant. Saryati, the fourth son of the Manu, had a daughter named Sukanya, who was married to the holy sage Kayavana. He had also a righteous son, called Ananta. The son of the latter was Revata, who ruled over the country called after his father Ananta, and dwelt at the capital denominated Kazastali. The son of this prince was Rayavata or Kakudmin, the eldest of 100 brethren. He had a very lovely daughter, and not finding anyone worthy of her hand, he repaired with her to the region of Brahma to consult the god where a fit bridegroom was to be met with. When he arrived, the choristers Ha-Ha, Hu, and others, were singing before Brahma, and Rayavata, waiting till they had finished, imagined the ages that elapsed during their performance to be but as a moment. At the end of their singing, Rayavata prostrated himself before Brahma, and explained his errand. "Whom should you wish for a son-in-law?" demanded Brahma, and the king mentioned to him various persons with whom he could be well pleased. Nodding his head gently, and graciously smiling, Brahma said to him, "Of those whom you have named, the 3rd or 4th generation no longer survives, for many successions of ages have passed away whilst you were listening to our songsters. Now upon earth the 28th great age of the present Manu is nearly finished, and the Kali period is at hand. You must therefore bestow this virgin gem upon some other husband, for you are now alone, and your friends, your ministers, servants, wife, kinsmen, armies, and treasures, have long since been swept away by the hand of time." Overcome with astonishment and alarm, the Raja then said to Brahma, "Since I am thus circumstanced, do thou, Lord, tell me unto whom the maiden shall be given." And the Creator of the world, whose throne is the lotus, thus benignantly replied to the prince, as he stood bowed and humble before him, "The being of whose commencement, course, and termination, we are ignorant, the unborn and omnipresent essence of all things, he whose real and infinite nature and essence we do not know, is the Supreme Vishnu. He is time, made up of moments and hours and years, whose influence is the source of perpetual change. He is the universal form of all things, from birth to death. He is eternal, without name or shape. Through the favor of that imperishable being am I the agent of his power in creation. Through his anger is Rudra the destroyer of the world, and the cause of preservation, Purusha, proceeds also from him. The unborn having assumed my person creates the world, In his own essence he provides for its duration. In the form of Rudra he devours all things, and with the body of Ananta he upholds them. Impersonated as Indra and the other gods he is the guardian of mankind, and as the sun and moon he disperses darkness. Taking upon himself the nature of fire he bestows warmth and maturity, and in the condition of the earth nourishes all beings. As one with air he gives activity to existence, and as one with water he satisfies all wants, whilst in the state of ether, associated with universal aggregation, he furnishes space for all objects. He is at once the creator, and that which is created, the preserver, and that which is preserved, the destroyer, and, as one with all things, that which is destroyed, and, as the indestructible, he is distinct from these three vicissitudes. In him is the world. He is the world, and he, the primeval self-born, is again present in the world. That mighty Vishnu, who is paramount over all beings, is now in a portion of himself upon the earth. That city Kazastali, which was formerly your capital, and rivaled the city of the immortals, is now known as Dwaraka, and there reigns a portion of that divine being in the person of Baladeva. To him, who appears as a man, present her as a wife. He is a worthy bridegroom for this excellent damsel, and she is a suitable bride for him. Being thus instructed by the lotus-born divinity, Rayavata returned with his daughter to earth, where he found the race of men dwindled in stature, reduced in vigor, and enfeebled in intellect. Repairing to the city of Kazastali, which he found much altered, the wise monarch bestowed his unequaled daughter on the wielder of the plowshare, whose breast was as fair and radiant as crystal. Beholding the damsel of excessively lofty height, the chief, whose banner is a palm tree, shortened her with the end of his plowshare, and she became his wife. Balarama, having espoused, agreeably to the ritual, Revati, the daughter of Rayavata, the king retired to the mountain Himalaya, and ended his days in devout austerities. Chapter 2. Dispersion of Revata's descendants, those of Drishta, those of Nabhaga, birth of Ikshwaku, the son of Vaivaswata, his sons. Line of Vikakshi, legend of Kakastha, of Dundhumara, of Yuvanaswa, of Mandathri. His daughters married to Saubhari, Parasara, whilst Kakudmin, surnamed Rayavata, was absent on his visit to the region of Brahma. The evil spirits or Rakshasas named Punyajanas destroyed his capital Kazastali. His 100 brothers, through dread of these foes, fled in different directions, and the Kshatriyas, their descendants, settled in many countries. From Drishta, the son of the Manu, sprang the Kshatriya race of Dashtaka. The son of Nabhaga was Nabhaga, his son was Ambusha, his son was Virupa, his son was Prishadaswa, his son was Radhanara, of whom it is sung, these, who were Kshatriyas by birth, the heads of the family of Radhanara, were called Angirasas, or sons of Angiras, and were Brahmins as well as Kshatriyas. Ikshwaku was born from the nostril of the Manu. As he happened to sneeze, he had 100 sons, of whom the 3 most distinguished were Vikakshi, Nimai, and Danda. 50 of the rest, under Sakuni, were the protectors of the northern countries. 48 were the princes of the south. Upon one of the days called Ashtaka, Ikshwaku, being desirous of celebrating ancestral obsequies, ordered Vikakshi to bring him flesh suitable for the offering. The prince accordingly went into the forest, and killed many deer, and other wild animals, for the celebration. Being weary with the chase, and being hungered, he sat down, and ate a hare, after which, being refreshed, he carried the rest of the game to his father. Vasishta, the family priest of the house of Ikshwaku, was summoned to consecrate the food, but he declared that it was impure, in consequence of Vikukshis having eaten a hare from amongst it, making it thus, as it were, the residue of his meal. Vikukshi was in consequence abandoned by his offended father, and the epithet Sazada, hair-eater, was affixed to him by the Guru. On the death of Ikshwaku, the dominion of the earth descended to Sazada, who was succeeded by his son Puranjaya. In the Treta age a violent war broke out between the gods and the Asuras, in which the former were vanquished. They consequently had recourse to Vishnu for assistance, and propitiated him by their adorations. The eternal ruler of the universe, Narayana, had compassion upon them, and said, "What you desire is known unto me. Hear how your wishes shall be fulfilled." There is an illustrious prince named Puranjaya, the son of a royal sage. Into his person I will infuse a portion of myself, and having descended upon earth I will in his person subdue all your enemies. Do you therefore endeavor to secure the aid of Puranjaya for the destruction of your foes. Acknowledging with reverence the kindness of the deity, the immortals quitted his presence, and repaired to Puranjaya, whom they thus addressed: "Most renowned Kshatriya, we have come to thee to solicit thy alliance against our enemies. It will not become thee to disappoint our hopes." The prince replied, "Let this your Indra, the monarch of the spheres, the god of 100 sacrifices, consent to carry me upon his shoulders, and I will wage battle with your adversaries as your ally." The gods and Indra readily answered, "So be it," and the latter assuming the shape of a bull, the prince mounted upon his shoulder. Being then filled with delight, and invigorated by the power of the eternal ruler of all movable and immovable things, he destroyed in the battle that ensued all the enemies of the gods, and because he annihilated the demon host whilst seated upon the shoulder, or the hump, kukud, of the bull, he thence obtained the appellation Kukastha. Seated on the hump, the son of Kukastha was Ananas, whose son was Prithu, whose son was Viswagaswa, whose son was Ardra, whose son was Uvanaswa, whose son was Sravista, by whom the city of Sravasti was founded. The son of Sravista was Vrihadaswa, whose son was Kivalayaswa. This prince, inspired with the spirit of Vishnu, destroyed the Asura Dundhu, who had harassed the pious sage Utanka, and he was thence entitled Dundhumara. In his conflict with the demon the king was attended by his sons, to the number of 21,000, and all these, with the exception of only 3, perished in the engagement, consumed by the fiery breath of Dundhu. The 3 who survived were Driyaswa, Chandraswa, and Kapilaswa, and the son and successor of the elder of these was Hariyaswa. His son was Nikama, his son was Sanhataswa, his son was Krisaswa, his son was Prasnajit, and his son was another Uvanaswa. Uvanaswa had no son, at which he was deeply grieved. Whilst residing in the vicinage of the holy Munis, he inspired them with pity for his childless condition, and they instituted a religious rite to procure him progeny. One night during its performance the sages, having placed a vessel of consecrated water upon the altar, had retired to repose. It was past midnight, when the king awoke, exceedingly thirsty, and unwilling to disturb any of the holy inmates of the dwelling. He looked about for something to drink. In his search he came to the water in the jar, which had been sanctified and endowed with prolific efficacy by sacred texts, and he drank it. When the Munis rose, and found that the water had been drunk, They inquired who had taken it, and said, "The queen that has drunk this water shall give birth to a mighty and valiant son." "It was I," exclaimed the Raja, "who unwittingly drank the water." And accordingly in the belly of Yuvanaswar was conceived a child, and it grew, and in due time it ripped open the right side of the Raja, and was born, and the Raji did not die. Upon the birth of the child, who'll be its nurse, said the Munis, when Indra, the king of the gods, appeared, and said, "He shall have me for his nurse, Mamdasyati," and hence the boy was named Mandatory. Indra put his forefinger into the mouth of the infant, who sucked it, and drew from it heavenly nectar, and he grew up, and became a mighty monarch, and reduced the 7 continental zones under his dominion. And here a verse is recited, "From the rising to the going down of the sun, all that is irradiated by his light, is the land of Mandatory, the son of Yuvanaswar." Mandatory married Vindhyamati, the daughter of Sasavindu, and had by her 3 sons, Purakutsa, Ambirusha, and Muchakunda. He had also 50 daughters. The devout sage Saubhari, learned in the Vedas, had spent 12 years immersed in a piece of water. The sovereign of the fish in which, named Samada, of large bulk, had a very numerous progeny. His children and his grandchildren were wont to frolic round him in all directions, and he lived amongst them happily, playing with them night and day. Saubhari the sage, being disturbed in his devotions by their sports, contemplated the patriarchal felicity of the monarch of the lake, and reflected, "How enviable is this creature, who, although born in a degraded state of being, is ever thus sporting cheerfully amongst his offspring and their young. Of a truth he awakens in my mind the wish to taste such pleasure, and I also will make merry amidst my children." Having thus resolved, the Muni came up hastily from the water, and, desirous of entering upon the condition of a householder, went to Mandatory to demand one of his daughters as his wife. As soon as he was informed of the arrival of the sage, the king rose up from his throne, offered him the customary libation, and treated him with the most profound respect. Having taken a seat, Saubhari said to the Raja, "I have determined to marry. Do you, king, give me one of your daughters as a wife. Disappoint not my affection." It is not the practice of the princes of the race of Kakastha to turn away from compliance with the wishes of those who come to them for succor. There are, O monarch, other kings of the earth to whom daughters have been born, but your family is above all renowned for observance of liberality in your donations to those who ask your bounty. You have, O prince, 50 daughters. Give one of them to me, that so I may be relieved from the anxiety I suffer through fear that my suit may be denied. When Mandatory heard this request, and looked upon the person of the sage, emaciated by austerity and old age, he felt disposed to refuse his consent, but dreading to incur the anger and imprecation of the holy man, he was much perplexed, and, declining his head, was lost a while in thought. The Rishi, observing his hesitation, said, "On what, O Raja, do you meditate?" "I have asked for nothing which may not be readily accorded, and what is there that shall be unattainable to you, if my desires be gratified by the damsel whom you must needs give unto me?" To this, the king, apprehensive of his displeasure, answered and said, "Grave sir, it is the established usage of our house to wed our daughters to such persons only as they shall themselves select from suitors of fitting rank, and since this your request is not yet made known to my maidens, It is impossible to say whether it may be equally agreeable to them as it is to me. This is the occasion of my perplexity, and I am at a loss what to do." This answer of the king was fully understood by the rishi, who said to himself, "This is merely a device of the Raja to evade compliance with my suit. There has reflected that I am an old man, having no attractions for women, and not likely to be accepted by any of his daughters. Even be it so, I will be a match for him." And he then spake aloud, and said, "Since such is the custom, mighty prince, give orders that I be admitted into the interior of the palace. Should any of the maidens your daughters be willing to take me for a bridegroom, I will have her for my bride. If no one be willing, then let the blame attach alone to the years that I have numbered." Having thus spoken, he was silent. Mandatory, unwilling to provoke the indignation of the Muni, was accordingly obliged to command the eunuch to lead the sage into the inner chambers, who, as he entered the apartments, put on a form and features of beauty far exceeding the personal charms of mortals, or even of heavenly spirits. His conductor, addressing the princesses, said to them, "Your father, young ladies, sends you this pious sage, who has demanded of him a bride, and the Raja has promised him, that he will not refuse him any one of you who shall choose him for her husband." When the damsels heard this, and looked upon the person of the rishi, they were equally inspired with passion and desire, and, like a troop of female elephants disputing the favors of the master of the herd, they all contended for the choice. "Away, away, sister," said each to the other, "this is my election, he is my choice. He is not a meet bridegroom for you. He has been created by Brahma on purpose for me, as I have been created in order to become his wife. He has been chosen by me before you. You have no right to prevent his becoming my husband." In this way arose a violent quarrel amongst the daughters of the king, each insisting upon the exclusive election of the rishi, and as the blameless sage was thus contended for by the rival princesses, the superintendent of the inner apartments, with a downcast look, reported to the king what had occurred. Perplexed more than ever by this information, the Raja exclaimed, "What is all this? And what am I to do now? What is it that I have said?" And at last, although with extreme reluctance, he was obliged to agree that the rishi should marry all his daughters. Having then wedded, agreeably to law, all the princesses, the sage took them home to his habitation, where he employed the chief of architects, Vishnu, equal in taste and skill to Brahma himself, to construct separate palaces for each of his wives. He ordered him to provide each building with elegant couches and seats and furniture, and to attach to them gardens and groves, with reservoirs of water, where the wild duck and the swan should sport amidst beds of lotus flowers. The divine artist obeyed his injunctions, and constructed splendid apartments for the wives of the rishi, in which by command of Saubhari, the inexhaustible and divine treasure called Nanda took up his permanent abode, and the princesses entertained all their guests and dependents with abundant viands of every description and the choicest quality. After some period had elapsed, the heart of King Mandatory yearned for his daughters, and he felt solicitous to know whether they were happily circumstanced. Setting off therefore on a visit to the hermitage of Saubhari, he beheld upon his arrival a row of beautiful crystal palaces, shining as brilliantly as the rays of the sun, and situated amidst lovely gardens, and reservoirs of pellucid water. Entering into one of these magnificent palaces, he found and embraced a daughter, and said to her, as the tears of affection and delight trembled in his eyes. "Dear child, tell me how it is with you. Are you happy here? Or not? Does the great sage treat you with tenderness? Or do you revert with regret to your early home?" The princess replied, "You behold, my father, how delightful a mansion I inhabit, surrounded by lovely gardens and lakes, where the lotus blooms, and the wild swans murmur. Here I have delicious viands, fragrant unguents, costly ornaments, splendid raiment, soft beds, and every enjoyment that affluence can procure. Why then should I call to memory the place of my birth? To your favor am I indebted for all that I possess. I have only one cause of anxiety, which is this: my husband is never absent from my dwelling, solely attached to me. He is always at my side, he never goes near my sisters, and I am concerned to think that they must feel mortified by his neglect. This is the only circumstance that gives me uneasiness." Proceeding to visit another of his daughters, the king, after embracing her, and sitting down, made the same inquiry, and received the same account of the enjoyments with which the princess was provided. There was also the same complaint, that the rishi was wholly devoted to her, and paid no attention to her sisters. In every palace Mandatory heard the same story from each of his daughters in reply to his questions, and with a heart overflowing with wonder and delight he repaired to the wise Saubhari, whom he found alone, and, after paying homage to him, thus addressed him: "Holy sage, I have witnessed this thy marvelous power. The like miraculous faculties I have never known any other to possess. How great is the reward of thy devout austerities." Having thus saluted the sage, and been received by him with respect, the Raja resided with him for some time, partaking of the pleasures of the place, and then returned to his capital. In the course of time the daughters of Mandatory bore to Saubhari 150 sons, and day by day his affection for his children became more intense, and his heart was wholly occupied with the sentiment of self. "These my sons," he loved to think, "will charm me with their infant prattle. Then they will learn to walk. They will then grow up to youth and to manhood. I shall see them married, and they will have children, and I may behold the children of those children." By these and similar reflections, however, he perceived that his anticipations every day outstripped the course of time, and at last he exclaimed, "What exceeding folly is mine! There is no end to my desires. Though all I hope should come to pass for 10,000 or 100,000 years, still new wishes would spring up. When I have seen my infants walk, when I have beheld their youth, their manhood, their marriage, their progeny, still my expectations are unsatisfied, and my soul yearns to behold the descendants of their descendants. Shall I even see them, some other wish will be engendered, and when that is accomplished, how is the birth of fresh desires to be prevented? I have at last discovered that there is no end to hope, until it terminates in death, and that the mind which is perpetually engrossed by expectation, can never be attached to the Supreme Spirit. My mental devotions, whilst immersed in water, were interrupted by attachment to my friend the fish. The result of that connection was my marriage, and insatiable desires are the consequences of my married life. The pain attendant upon the birth of my single body, is now augmented by the cares attached to 50 others, and is farther multiplied by the numerous children whom the princesses have borne to me. The sources of affliction will be repeatedly renewed by their children, and by their espousals, and by their progeny, and will be infinitely increased. A married life is a mine of individual anxiety. My devotions, first disturbed by the fish of the pool, have since been obstructed by temporal indulgence, and I have been beguiled by that desire for progeny which was communicated to me by association with Samadha. Separation from the world is the only path of the sage to final liberation. From commerce with mankind innumerable errors proceed. The ascetic who has accomplished a course of self-denial falls from perfection by contracting worldly attachments. How much more likely should one so fall whose observances are incomplete? My intellect has been a prey to the desire of married happiness, but I will now so exert myself for the salvation of my soul, that, exempt from human imperfections, I may be exonerated from human sufferings. To that end I will propitiate, by arduous penance, Vishnu, the creator of the universe, whose form is inscrutable, who is smaller than the smallest, larger than the largest, the source of darkness and of light, the sovereign God of gods. On his everlasting body, which is both discrete and indiscrete substance, illimitably mighty, and identical with the universe, may my mind, wholly free from sin, be ever steadily intent, so that I may be born no more. To him I fly for refuge, to that Vishnu, who is the teacher of teachers, who is one with all beings, the pure eternal Lord of all, without beginning, middle, or end, and besides whom is nothing. Chap 3. Saubhari and his wives adopt an ascetic life. Descendants of Mandatory. Legend of Narmada and Parakutsa. Legend of Trisanku, Bau driven from his kingdom by the Haihayas and Tilajangas. Birth of Sagara, he conquers the barbarians, imposes upon them distinguishing usages, and excludes them from offerings to fire, and the study of the Vedas. Having thus communed with himself, Saubhari abandoned his children, his home, and all his splendor, and, accompanied by his wives, entered the forest, where he daily practiced the observances followed by the ascetics termed Vakanasas, or anchorites having families, until he had cleansed himself from all sin. When his intellect had attained maturity, he concentrated in his spirit the sacramental fires, and became a religious mendicant. Then, having consigned all his acts to the Supreme, he obtained the condition of Achyuta, which knows no change, and is not subject to the vicissitudes of birth, transmigration, or death. Whoever reads, or hears, or remembers, or understands this legend of Saubhari, and his espousal of the daughters of Mandatory, shall never, for 8 successive births, be addicted to evil thoughts, nor shall he act unrighteously, nor shall his mind dwell upon improper objects, nor shall he be influenced by selfish attachments. The line of Mandatory is now resumed. The son of Ambrosia, the son of Mandatory, was Uvanaswa, his son was Harita, from whom the Angirasa Haritas were descended. In the regions below the earth the Gandhabas called Mauryas, or sons of the Muni Kasyapa, who were 60 millions in number, had defeated the tribes of the Nagas, or snake gods, and seized upon their most precious jewels, and usurped their dominion. Deprived of their power by the Gandhabas, the serpent chiefs addressed the god of the gods, as he awoke from his slumbers, and the blossoms of his lotus eyes opened while listening to their hymns. They said, "Lord, how shall we be delivered from this great fear?" Then replied the first of males, who is without beginning, "I will enter into the person of Parakutsa, the son of Mandatory, the son of Uvanaswa, and in him will I quiet these iniquitous Gandhabas." On hearing these words, the snake gods bowed and withdrew, and returning to their country dispatched Narmada to solicit the aid of Parakutsa. Narmada accordingly went to Parakutsa, and conducted him to the regions below the earth, where, being filled with the might of the deity, he destroyed the Gandharvas. He then returned to his own palace, and the snake gods, in acknowledgement of Narmada's services, conferred upon her as a blessing, that whosoever should think of her, and invoke her name, should never have any dread of the venom of snakes. This is the invocation: salutation be to Narmada in the morning, salutation be to Narmada at night, salutation be to thee, O Narmada. Defend me from the serpent's poison. Whoever repeats this day and night, shall never be bitten by a snake in the dark nor in entering a chamber, nor shall he who calls it to mind when he eats suffer any injury from poison, though it be mixed with his food. To Parakutsa also the snake gods announced that the series of his descendants should never be cut off. Parakutsa had a son by Narmada named Trasadasu, whose son was Samputa, whose son was Anaranya, who was slain by Ravana in his triumphant progress through the nations. The son of Anaranya was Prishadaswa, his son was Hariyaswa, his son was Sumanas, his son was Tranwan, his son was Triyarana, and his son was Satyavarata, who obtained the appellation of Trisanku, and was degraded to the condition of a Chandala, or outcast. During a 12 years famine, Trisanku provided the flesh of deer for the nourishment of the wife and children of Viswamitra, suspending it upon a spreading fig tree on the borders of the Ganges, that he might not subject them to the indignity of receiving presents from an outcast. On this account Viswamitra, being highly pleased with him, elevated him in his living body to heaven. The son of Trisanku was Harishchandra, his son was Rohitaswa, his son was Harita, his son was Chanchu, who had two sons named Vijaya and Sudava. Aruka was the son of Vijaya, and his own son was Vruka, whose son was Bhu, or Bathuka. This prince was vanquished by the tribes of Haihayas and Tilajangas, and his country was overrun by them, in consequence of which he fled into the forests with his wives. One of these was pregnant, and being an object of jealousy to a rival queen, the latter gave her poison to prevent her delivery. The poison had the effect of confining the child in the womb for 7 years. Bhu, having waxed old, died in the neighborhood of the residence of the Muniorva. His queen, having constructed his pile, ascended it with the determination of accompanying him in death, but the sage Orva, who knew all things, past, present, and to come, issued forth from his hermitage, and forbade her, saying, "Hold! Hold! This is unrighteous, a valiant prince, the monarch of many realms, the offerer of many sacrifices, the destroyer of his foes, a universal emperor, is in thy womb. Think not of committing so desperate an act." Accordingly, in obedience to his injunctions, she relinquished her intention. The sage then conducted her to his abode, and after some time a very splendid boy was born. Along with him the poison that had been given to his mother was expelled, and Orva, after performing the ceremonies required at birth, gave him on that account the name of Sagara, from Sa, with, and Gara, poison. The same holy sage celebrated his investiture with the cord of his class, instructed him fully in the Vedas, and taught him the use of arms, especially those of fire, called after Bhargava. When the boy had grown up, and was capable of reflection, he said to his mother one day, "Why are we dwelling in this hermitage? Where is my father? And who is he?" His mother, in reply, related to him all that had happened. Upon hearing which he was highly incensed, and vowed to recover his patrimonial kingdom, and exterminate the Haihayas and Tilajangas, by whom it had been overrun. Accordingly, when he became a man, he put nearly the whole of the Haihyas to death, and would have also destroyed the Sakas, the Yavanas, Kambodjas, Paradas, and Pandavas, but that they applied to Vasishta, the family priest of Sagara, for protection. Vasishta, regarding them as annihilated, or deprived of power, though living, thus spake to Sagara, "Enough, enough, my son, pursue no farther these objects of your wrath, whom you may look upon as no more. In order to fulfill your vow, I have separated them from affinity to the regenerate tribes, and from the duties of their castes." Sagara, in compliance with the injunctions of his spiritual guide, contented himself therefore with imposing upon the vanquished nations peculiar distinguishing marks. He made the Yavanas shave their heads entirely, the Sakas he compelled to shave the upper half of their heads. The Paradas wore their hair long, and the Pandavas let their beards grow, in obedience to his commands. Them also, and other Kshatriya races, he deprived of the established usages of oblations to fire and the study of the Vedas, and thus separated from religious rites, and abandoned by the Brahmins. These different tribes became mlechas. Sagara, after the recovery of his kingdom, reigned over the seven-zoned earth with undisputed dominion. Chap. 4. The progeny of Sagara, their wickedness. He performs an Aswamedha, the horse stolen by Kapila, found by Sagara's sons, who are all destroyed by the sage, the horse recovered by Ansumat, his descendants. Legend of Maitrasaha or Kalmashapada, the son of Sudasa. Legend of Katwanga, birth of Rama and the other sons of Dasarata. Epitome of the history of Rama, his descendants, and those of his brothers. Line of Kusa. Vrihadbala, the last, killed in the Great War. Sumati, the daughter of Kasyapa, and Kasini, the daughter of Raja Vidarbha, were the two wives of Sagara. Being without progeny, the king solicited the aid of the sage Orva with great earnestness, and the Muni pronounced this boon, that one wife should bear one son, the upholder of his race, and the other should give birth to 60,000 sons, and he left it to them to make their election. Kasini chose to have the single son, Sumati the multitude, and it came to pass in a short time that the former bore a Samanjas, a prince through whom the dynasty continued, and the daughter of Vinata, Sumati, had 60,000 sons. The son of Asamanjas was Ansumat. Asamanjas was from his boyhood of very irregular conduct. His father hoped that as he grew up to manhood he would reform, but finding that he continued guilty of the same immorality, Sagara abandoned him. The 60,000 sons of Sagara followed the example of their brother Asamanjas. The path of virtue and piety being obstructed in the world by the sons of Sagara, the gods repaired to the Muni Kapila, who was a portion of Vishnu, free from fault, and endowed with all true wisdom. Having approached him with respect, they said, "O Lord, what will become of the world, if these sons of Sagara are permitted to go on in the evil ways which they have learned from Asamanjas? Do thou, then, assume a visible form, for the protection of the afflicted universe." "Be satisfied," replied the sage, "in a brief time the sons of Sagara shall be all destroyed." At that period Sagara commenced the performance of the solemn sacrifice of a horse, who was guarded by his own sons. Nevertheless someone stole the animal, and carried it off into a chasm in the earth. Sagara commanded his sons to search for the steed, and they, tracing him by the impressions of his hoofs, followed his course with perseverance, until coming to the chasm where he had entered, they proceeded to enlarge it, and dug downwards each for a league. Coming to Patala, they beheld the horse wandering freely about, and at no great distance from him they saw the Rishi Kapila sitting, with his head declined in meditation, and illuminating the surrounding space with radiance as bright as the splendors of the autumnal sun, shining in an unclouded sky. Exclaiming, "This is the villain who has maliciously interrupted our sacrifice, and stolen the horse. Kill him! Kill him!" They ran towards him with uplifted weapons. The Muni slowly raised his eyes, and for an instant looked upon them, and they were reduced to ashes by the sacred flame that darted from his person. When Sagara learned that his sons, whom he had sent in pursuit of the sacrificial steed, had been destroyed by the might of the great Rishi Kapila, he dispatched Ansumat, the son of Asamaujas, to effect the animal's recovery. The youth, proceeding by the deep path which the princes had dug, arrived where Kapila was, and bowing respectfully, prayed to him, and so propitiated him, that the saint said, "Go, my son, deliver the horse to your grandfather, and demand a boon. Thy grandson shall bring down the river of heaven on the earth." Ansumat requested as a boon that his uncles, who had perished through the sage's displeasure, might, although unworthy of it, be raised to heaven through his favor. "I have told you," replied Kapila, "that your grandson shall bring down upon earth the Ganges of the gods, and when her waters shall wash the bones and ashes of thy grandfather's sons, they shall be raised to Swarga." Such is the efficacy of the stream that flows from the toe of Vishnu, that it confers heaven upon all who bathe in it designedly, or who even become accidentally immersed in it. Those even shall obtain Swarga, whose bones, skin, fibers, hair, or any other part, shall be left after death upon the earth which is contiguous to the Ganges. Having acknowledged reverentially the kindness of the sage, Ansumat returned to his grandfather, and delivered to him the horse. Sagara, on recovering the steed, completed his sacrifice, and in affectionate memory of his sons, denominated Sagara the chasm which they had dug. The son of Ansumat was Dilepa, his son was Bhagrata, who brought Ganga down to earth, whence she is called Bhagrati. The son of Bhagrata was Sruta, his son was Nabhaga, his son was Ambusha, his son was Sindhudweepa, his son was Ayutaswa, his son was Richupana, the friend of Nala, skilled profoundly in dice. The son of Richupana was Savikama, his son was Sudasa, his son was Sordasa, named also Mitrasaha. The son of Sudasa, having gone into the woods to hunt, fell in with a couple of tigers, by whom the forest had been cleared of the deer. The king slew one of these tigers with an arrow. At the moment of expiring, the form of the animal was changed, and it became that of a fiend of fearful figure and hideous aspect. Its companion, threatening the prince with its vengeance, disappeared. After some interval Sordasa celebrated a sacrifice, which was conducted by Vasishtha. At the close of the rite Vasishtha went out, when the Rakshas, the fellow of the one that had been killed in the figure of a tiger, assumed the semblance of Vasishtha, and came and said to the king, "Now that the sacrifice is ended, you must give me flesh to eat, let it be cooked, and I will presently return." Having said this, he withdrew, and, transforming himself into the shape of the cook, dressed some human flesh, which he brought to the king, who, receiving it on a plate of gold, awaited the reappearance of Vasishtha. As soon as the Muni returned, the king offered to him the dish. Vasishtha, surprised at such want of propriety in the king, as his offering him meat to eat, considered what it should be that was so presented, and by the efficacy of his meditations discovered that it was human flesh. His mind being agitated with wrath, he denounced a curse upon the Raja, saying, "Inasmuch as you have insulted all such holy men as we are, by giving me what is not to be eaten, your appetite shall henceforth be excited by similar food." "It was yourself," replied the Raja to the indignant sage, "who commanded this food to be prepared." "By me!" exclaimed Vasishtha, "how could that have been?" And again having recourse to meditation, he detected the whole truth. Foregoing then all displeasure towards the king, he said, "The food to which I have sentenced you shall not be your sustenance forever, it shall only be so for 12 years." The king, who had taken up water in the palms of his hands, and was prepared to curse the Muni, now considered that Vasishtha was his spiritual guide, and being reminded by Madhyavanti his queen that it ill became him to denounce an imprecation upon a holy teacher, who was the guardian divinity of his race, abandoned his intention. Unwilling to cast the water upon the earth, lest it should wither up the grain, for it was impregnated with his malediction, and equally reluctant to throw it up into the air, lest it should blast the clouds, and dry up their contents, he threw it upon his own feet. Scalded by the heat which the water had derived from his angry imprecation, the feet of the Raja became spotted black and white, and he thence obtained the name of Kalmashapada, or he with the spotted, Kalmasha, feet, Pada. In consequence of the curse of Vasishtha, the Raja became a cannibal every 6th watch of the day for 12 years, and in that state wandered through the forests, and devoured multitudes of men. On one occasion he beheld a holy person engaged in dalliance with his wife. As soon as they saw his terrific form, they were frightened, and endeavored to escape, but the regal Rakshasa overtook and seized the husband. The wife of the Brahmin then also desisted from flight, and earnestly entreated the savage to spare her lord, exclaiming, "Thou, Maitrasaha, art the pride of the royal house of Ikshwaku, not a malignant fiend. It is not in thy nature, who knowest the characters of women, to carry off and devour my husband." But all was in vain, and, regardless of her reiterated supplications, he ate the Brahmin, as a tiger devours a deer. The Brahmin's wife, furious with wrath, then addressed the Raja, and said, "Since you have barbarously disturbed the joys of a wedded pair, and killed my husband, your death shall be the consequence of your associating with your queen." So saying, she entered the flames. At the expiration of the period of his curse, Sordasa returned home. Being reminded of the imprecation of the Brahmani by his wife Madhyavanti, he abstained from conjugal intercourse, and was in consequence childless. But having solicited the interposition of Vasishtha, Madhyavanti became pregnant. The child, however, was not born for 7 years, when the queen, becoming impatient, divided the womb with a sharp stone, and was thereby delivered. The child was thence called Asmaka, from Asman, a stone. The son of Asmaka was Mulaka, who, when the warrior tribe was extirpated upon earth, was surrounded and concealed by a number of females, whence he was denominated Narakavika, having women for armor. The son of Mulaka was Dasarata, his son was Ilavla, his son was Viswasaha, his son was Katwanga, called also Dilipa, who in a battle between the gods and the Asuras, being called by the former to their succor, killed a number of the latter. Having thus acquired the friendship of the deities in heaven, they desired him to demand a boon. He said to them, "If a boon is to be accepted by me, then tell me, as a favor, what is the duration of my life?" "The length of your life is but an hour," the gods replied. On which, Katwanga, who was swift of motion, descended in his easy gliding chariot to the world of mortals. Arrived there, he prayed, and said, "If my own soul has never been dearer to me than the sacred Brahmins, if I have never deviated from the discharge of my duty, if I have never regarded gods, men, animals, vegetables, or created things, as different from the imperishable, then may I, with unswerving step, attain to that divine being on whom holy sages meditate." Having thus spoken, he was united with that supreme being, who is Vasudeva, with that elder of all the gods, who is abstract existence, and whose form cannot be described. Thus he obtained absorption, according to this stanza, which was repeated formerly by the 7 rishis. Like unto Katwanga will be no one upon earth, who having come from heaven, and dwelt an hour amongst men, became united with the 3 worlds by his liberality and knowledge of truth. The son of Katwanga was Durgabayu, his son was Raghu, his son was his son was Dasarata. The god from whose navel the lotus springs became fourfold, as the 4 sons of Dasarata, Rama, Lakshmana, Bharata, and Shatrugna, for the protection of the world. Rama, whilst yet a boy, accompanied Viswamitra, to protect his sacrifice, and slew Tadaka. He afterwards killed Maricha with his resistless shafts, and Subayu and others fell by his arms. He removed the guilt of Ahalya by merely looking upon her. In the palace of Janaka he broke with ease the mighty bow of Maeswara, and received the hand of Sita, the daughter of the king, self-born from the earth, as the prize of his prowess. He humbled the pride of Parasurama, who vaunted his triumphs over the race of Haihaya, and his repeated slaughters of the Kshatriya tribe. Obedient to the commands of his father, and cherishing no regret for the loss of sovereignty, he entered the forest, accompanied by his brother Lakshmana and by his wife, where he killed in conflict Virada, Karadushana and other Rakshasas, the headless giant Kabanda, and Bali the monkey monarch. Having built a bridge across the ocean, and destroyed the whole Rakshasa nation, he recovered his bride Sita, whom their 10-headed king Ravana had carried off, and returned to Ayodhya with her, after she had been purified by the fiery ordeal from the soil contracted by her captivity, and had been honored by the assembled gods, who bore witness to her virtue. Bharata made himself master of the country of the Gandhabas, after destroying vast numbers of them, and Shatrugna, having killed the Rakshasa chief Lavana, the son of Madhu, took possession of his capital Mathura. Having thus, by their unequaled valor and might, rescued the whole world from the dominion of malignant fiends, Rama, Lakshmana, Bharata, and Shatrugna reascended to heaven, and were followed by those of the people of Kosala who were fervently devoted to these incarnate portions of the Supreme Vishnu. Rama and his brothers had each 2 sons. Kusa and Lava were the sons of Rama, those of Lakshmana were Angada and Chandraketu, the sons of Bharata were Takshara and Pushkara, and Subayu and Sarasana were the sons of Shatrugna. The son of Kusa was Atithi, his son was Nishada, his son was Nala, his son was Nabas, his son was Pundruka, his son was Kshimadanwan, his son was Davinaka, his son was Ahinagu, his son was Parapatra, his son was Dala, his son was Gala, his son was Yuktha, his son was Vajranabha, his son was Sankanabha, his son was Abhyathitaswa, his son was Viswasaha, his son was Hiranyanabha, who was a pupil of the mighty Yogi Jaimani, and communicated the knowledge of spiritual exercises to Yajnavalkya. The son of this saintly king was Pushya, his son was Dhruvasandhi, his son was Sudarsana, his son was Agnivarna, his son was Sira, his son was Mayu, who through the power of devotion, yoga, is still living in the village called Kalapa, and in a future age will be the restorer of the Kshatriya race in the solar dynasty. Mayu had a son named Prasusruta, his son was Susandhi, his son was Amashur, his son was Mahaswat, his son was Visrutavat, and his son was Vrihadbala, who was killed in the great war by Abhimanyu, the son of Anjana. These are the most distinguished princes in the family of Ikshwaku. Whoever listens to the account of them will be purified from all his sins. Chap. V. Kings of Mithila. Legend of Nimai, the son of Ikshwaku, birth of Janaka. Sacrifice of Saradwa, origin of Sita, descendants of Kazadwa. Kriti, the last of the Mithila princes, the son of Ikshwaku, who was named Nimai, instituted a sacrifice that was to endure for 1,000 years, and applied to Vasishta to offer the oblations. Vasishta in answer said, that he had been pre-engaged by Indra for 500 years, but that if the Raja would wait for some time, he would come and officiate as superintending priest. The king made no answer, and Vasishta went away, supposing that he had assented. When the sage had completed the performance of the ceremonies he had conducted for Indra, he returned with all speed to Nimai, purposing to render him the like office. When he arrived, however, and found that Nimai had retained Gautama and other priests to minister at his sacrifice, he was much displeased, and pronounced upon the king, who was then asleep, a curse to this effect, that since he had not intimated his intention, but transferred to Gautama the duty he had first entrusted to himself, Vasishta, Nimai should henceforth cease to exist in a corporeal form. When Nimai woke, and knew what had happened, he in return denounced as an imprecation upon his unjust preceptor, that he also should lose his bodily existence, as the punishment of uttering a curse upon him without previously communicating with him. Nimai then abandoned his bodily condition. The spirit of Vasishta, also leaving his body, was united with the spirits of Mitra and Varuna for a season, until, through their passion for the Nymphurvasi, the sage was born again in a different shape. The corpse of Nimai was preserved from decay by being embalmed with fragrant oils and resins, and it remained as entire as if it were immortal. When the sacrifice was concluded, the priests applied to the gods, who had come to receive their portions, that they would confer a blessing upon the author of the sacrifice. The gods were willing to restore him to bodily life, but Nimai declined its acceptance, saying, "O deities, who are the alleviators of all worldly suffering, there is not in the world a deeper cause of distress than the separation of soul and body. It is therefore my wish to dwell in the eyes of all beings, but never more to resume a corporeal shape." To this desire the gods assented, and Nimai was placed by them in the eyes of all living creatures, in consequence of which their eyelids are ever opening and shutting. As Nimai left no successor, the Munis, apprehensive of the consequences of the earth being without a ruler, agitated the body of the prince, and produced from it a prince who was called Janaka, from being born without a progenitor. In consequence of his father being without a body, Vaidya, he was termed also Vaidya, the son of the bodiless, and the further received the name of Mithi, from having been produced by agitation. Mathana, the son of Janaka, was Yudavasu, his son was Nandavardhana, his son was Sukatu, his son was Devarata, his son was Vrihadatha, his son was Mahavatriya, his son was Satyadrati, his son was Drishtaketu, his son was Haryaswa, his son was Maru, his son was Pratabandaka, his son was Kritaratha, his son was Kritar, his son was Vibhuda, his son was Mahadrati, his son was Kritarata, his son was Maharaman, his son was Shuvanaraman, his son was Haswaraman, his son was Saradwa ploughing the ground, to prepare it for a sacrifice which he instituted. In order to obtain progeny, there sprang up in the furrow a damsel, who became his daughter Sita. The brother of Saradwa was Kazadwa, who was king of Kasi. He had a son also, named Banumat. The son of Banumat was Satadama, his son was Sachi, his son was Urjavaha, his son was Satyadwa, his son was Kuni, his son was Anjana, his son was Ritujat, his son was Arishtanmai, his son was Srutayas, his son was Supaswa, his son was Sanjaya, his son was Kshimari, his son was Ananas, his son was Minaratha, his son was Sayaratha, his son was Sayarati, his son was Uphagu, his son was Sruta, his son was Saswata, his son was Sudanwan, his son was Subasa, his son was Susruta, his son was Jaya, his son was Vijaya, his son was Rita, his son was Sunaya, his son was Vitahavya, his son was Driti, his son was Bahulaswa, his son was Kriti, with whom terminated the family of Janaka. These are the kings of Mithila, who for the most part will be proficient in spiritual knowledge. Chap Vi, kings of the lunar dynasty. Origin of Soma, or the moon. He carries off Tara, the wife of Vrihaspati. War between the gods and Asuras in consequence, appeased by Brahma. Birth of Buddha, married to Ila, daughter of Vaivaswata. Legend of his son Puravas, and the nymph Urvasi. The former institutes offerings with fire, ascends to the sphere of the Gandharvas. Maitreya, you have given me, reverend preceptor, an account of the kings of the dynasty of the sun. I am now desirous to hear a description of the princes who trace their lineage from the moon, and whose race is still celebrated for glorious deeds. Thou art able to relate it to me, Brahman, if thou wilt so favor me. Parasara, you shall hear from me, Maitreya, an account of the illustrious family of the moon, which has produced many celebrated rulers of the earth. A race adorned by the regal qualities of strength, valor, magnificence, prudence, and activity, and enumerating amongst its monarchs Nahashur, Yayati, Kartava Arjuna, and others equally renowned. That race will I describe to you. Do attend. Atri was the son of Brahma, the creator of the universe, who sprang from the lotus that grew from the navel of Narayana. The son of Atri was Soma, the moon, whom Brahma installed as the sovereign of plants, of Brahmins, and of the stars. Soma celebrated the Rajasuya sacrifice, and from the glory thence acquired, and the extensive dominion with which he had been invested, he became arrogant and licentious, and carried off Tara, the wife of Vrihaspati, the preceptor of the gods. In vain Vrihaspati sought to recover his bride, in vain Brahma commanded, and the holy sages remonstrated. Soma refused to relinquish her. Usanas, out of enmity to Vrihaspati, took part with Soma. Rudra, who had studied under Angiras, the father of Vrihaspati, befriended his fellow student. In consequence of Usanas, their preceptor, joining Soma, Jamba, Kajamba, and all the Daityas, Danavas, and other foes of the gods, came also to his assistance. whilst Indra and all the gods were the allies of Vrihaspati. Then there ensued a fierce contest, which, being on account of Taraka, or Tara, was termed the Tarakamaya or Taraka War. In this the gods, led by Rudra, hurled their missiles on the enemy, and the deities with equal determination assailed the gods. Earth, shaken to her center by the struggle between such foes, had recourse to Brahma for protection, on which he interposed, and commanding Usanas with the demons and Rudra with the deities to desist from strife, compelled Soma to restore Tara to her husband. Finding that she was pregnant, Vrihaspati desired her no longer to retain her burden, and in obedience to his orders she was delivered of a son, whom she deposited in a clump of long munja grass. The child, from the moment of its birth, was endued with a splendor that dimmed the radiance of every other divinity, and both Vrihaspati and Soma, fascinated by his beauty, claimed him as their child. The gods, in order to settle the dispute, appealed to Tara, but she was ashamed, and would make no answer. As she still continued mute to their repeated applications, the child became incensed, and was about to curse her, saying, "Unless, vile woman, you immediately declare who is my father, I will sentence you to such a fate as shall deter every female in future from hesitating to speak the truth." On this, Brahma again interfered, and pacified the child, and then, addressing Tara, said, "Tell me, daughter, is this the child of Vrihaspati, or of Soma?" "Of Soma," said Tara, blushing. As soon as she had spoken, the lord of the constellations, his countenance bright, and expanding with rapture, embraced his son, and said, "Well done, my boy, verily thou art wise." And hence his name was Buddha. It has already been related how Buddha begot Puravas by Ilar. Puravas was a prince renowned for liberality, devotion, magnificence, and love of truth, and for personal beauty. Urvasi, having incurred the imprecation of Mitra and Varuna, determined to take up her abode in the world of mortals, and descending accordingly, beheld Puravas. As soon as she saw him she forgot all reserve, and disregarding the delights of Swarga, became deeply enamored of the prince. Beholding her infinitely superior to all other females in grace, elegance, symmetry, delicacy, and beauty, Puravas was equally fascinated by Urvasi. Both were inspired by similar sentiments, and mutually feeling that each was everything to the other, thought no more of any other object. Confiding in his merits, Puravas addressed the nymph, and said, "Fair creature, I love you, have compassion on me, and return my affection." Urvasi, half averting her face through modesty, replied, "I will do so, if you will observe the conditions I have to propose." "What are they?" inquired the prince. "Declare them." "I have 2 rams," said the nymph, "which I love as children. They must be kept near my bedside, and never suffered to be carried away. You must also take care never to be seen by me undressed, and clarified butter alone must be my food." To these terms the king readily gave assent. After this, Puravas and Urvasi dwelt together in Alaka, sporting amidst the groves and lotus-crowned lakes of Chaitraratha, and the other forests there situated, for 61,000 years. The love of Puravas for his bride increased every day of its duration, and the affection of Urvasi augmenting equally in fervor. She never called to recollection residence amongst the immortals. Not so with the attendant spirits at the court of Indra, and nymphs, genii, and choristers, found heaven itself but dull whilst Urvasi was away. Knowing the agreement that Urvasi had made with the king, Viswavasa was appointed by the Gandharvas to effect its violation, and he, coming by night to the chamber where they slept, carried off one of the rams. Urvasi was awakened by its cries, and exclaimed, "Army! Who has stolen one of my children? Had I a husband, this would not have happened. To whom shall I apply for aid?" The Raja overheard her lamentation, but recollecting that he was undressed, and that Urvasi might see him in that state, did not move from the couch. Then the Gandharvas came and stole the other ram, and Urvasi, hearing it bleat, cried out that a woman had no protector who was the bride of a prince so dastardly as to submit to this outrage. This incensed Pauravas highly, and trusting that the nymph would not see his person, as it was dark, he rose, and took his sword, and pursued the robbers, calling upon them to stop, and receive their punishment. At that moment the Gandharvas caused a flash of brilliant lightning to play upon the chamber, and Urvasi beheld the king undressed. The compact was violated, and the nymph immediately disappeared. The Gandharvas, abandoning the rams, departed to the region of the gods. Having recovered the animals, the king returned delighted to his couch, but there he beheld no Urvasi, and not finding her anywhere, he wandered naked over the world, like one insane. At length, coming to Kurukshetra, he saw Urvasi sporting with 4 other nymphs of heaven in a lake beautified with lotuses, and he ran to her, and called her his wife, and wildly implored her to return. "Mighty monarch," said the nymph, "refrain from this extravagance. I am now pregnant. Depart at present, and come hither again at the end of a year, when I will deliver to you a son, and remain with you for one night." Pauravas, thus comforted, returned to his capital. Urvasi said to her companions, "This prince is a most excellent mortal. I lived with him long and affectionately united." "It was well done of you," they replied. "He is indeed of comely appearance, and one with whom we could live happily forever." When the year had expired, Urvasi and the monarch met at Kurukshetra, and she consigned to him his firstborn Ayus, and these annual interviews were repeated, until she had borne to him 5 sons. She then said to Pauravas, "Through regard for me, all the Gandharvas have expressed their joint purpose to bestow upon my lord their benediction. Let him therefore demand a boon." The Raja replied, "My enemies are all destroyed, my faculties are all entire, I have friends and kindred, armies and treasures. There is nothing which I may not obtain except living in the same region with my Urvasi. My only desire therefore is, to pass my life with her." When he had thus spoken, the Gandharvas brought to Pauravas a vessel with fire, and said to him, "Take this fire, and, according to the precepts of the Vedas, divide it into 3 fires, then fixing your mind upon the idea of living with Urvasi, offer oblations, and you shall assuredly obtain your wishes." The Raja took the brazier, and departed, and came to a forest. Then he began to reflect that he had committed a great folly in bringing away the vessel of fire instead of his bride, and leaving the vessel in the wood, he went disconsolate to his palace. In the middle of the night he awoke, and considered that the Gandharvas had given him the brazier to enable him to obtain the felicity of living with Urvasi, and that it was absurd in him to have left it by the way. Resolving therefore to recover it, he rose, and went to the place where he had deposited the vessel. But it was gone. In its stead he saw a young aswata tree growing out of a sami plant, and he reasoned with himself, and said, I left in this spot a vessel of fire, and now behold a young aswata tree growing out of a sami plant. Verily I will take these types of fire to my capital, and there, having engendered fire by their attrition, I will worship it. Having thus determined, he took the plants to his city, and prepared their wood for attrition, with pieces of as many inches long as there are syllables in the Gayatri. He recited that holy verse, and rubbed together sticks of as many inches as he recited syllables in the Gayatri. Having then solicited fire, he made it threefold, according to the injunctions of the Vedas, and offered oblations with it, proposing as the end of the ceremony reunion with Urvasi. In this way, celebrating many sacrifices agreeably to the form in which offerings are presented with fire, Puravas obtained a seat in the sphere of the Gandhabas, and was no more separated from his beloved. Thus fire, that was at first but one, was made threefold in the present Manvantara by the son of Ilar. Chap. 7. Sons of Puravas, descendants of Mavasu. Indra born as Gadi. Legend of Richiku and Satyavati, birth of Jamadani and Viswamitra. Parasurama the son of the former. Legend of Parasurama, Sunasvas and others the sons of Viswamitra, forming the Kausika race. Puravas had 6 sons: Ayus, Dimat, Amavasu, Viswavasu, Satyas, and Srutayas. The son of Amavata was Bhima, his son was Kanchana, his son was Sahatra, whose was Janu. This prince, whilst performing a sacrifice, saw the whole of the place overflowed by the waters of the Ganges. Highly offended at this intrusion, his eyes red with anger, he united the spirit of sacrifice with himself, by the power of his devotion, and drank up the river. The gods and sages upon this came to him, and appeased his indignation, and re-obtained Ganga from him, in the capacity of his daughter, whence she is called Jahnavi. The son of Janu was Sumantu, his son was Ajaka, his son was Valakaswa, his son was Kuza, who had 4 sons, Kuzamba, Kuzanaba, Amartaya, and Amavasu. Kuzamba, being desirous of a son, engaged in devout penance to obtain one who should be equal to Indra. Observing the intensity of his devotions, Indra was alarmed lest a prince of power like his own should be engendered, and determined therefore to take upon himself the character of Kuzamba's son. He was accordingly born as Gadi, of the race of Kuza, Kausika. Gadi had a daughter named Satyavati. Richiku, of the descendants of Bhrigu, demanded her in marriage. The king was very unwilling to give his daughter to a peevish old Brahmin, and demanded of him, as the nuptial present, 1,000 fleet horses, whose color should be white, with 1 black ear. Richiku, having propitiated Varuna, the god of ocean, obtained from him, at the holy place called Aswata there, 1,000 such steeds, and giving them to the king, espoused his daughter. In order to effect the birth of a son, Richiku prepared a dish of rice, barley, and pulse, with butter and milk, for his wife to eat, and at her request he consecrated a similar mixture for her mother, by partaking of which she should give birth to a prince of martial prowess. Leaving both dishes with his wife, after describing particularly which was intended for her, and which for her mother, the sage went forth to the forests. When the time arrived for the food to be eaten, the queen said to Satyavati, "Daughter, all persons wish their children to be possessed of excellent qualities, and would be mortified to see them surpassed by the merits of their mother's brother. It will be desirable for you, therefore, to give me the mess your husband has set apart for you, and to eat of that intended for me, for the son which it is to procure me is destined to be the monarch of the whole world, whilst that which your dish would give you must be a Brahmin, alike devoid of affluence, valor, and power." Satyavati agreed to her mother's proposal, and they exchanged messes. When Richika returned home, and beheld Satyavati, he said to her, "Sinful woman, what hast thou done? I view thy body of a fearful appearance. Of a surety thou hast eaten the consecrated food which was prepared for thy mother. Thou hast done wrong. In that food I had infused the properties of power and strength and heroism. In thine, the qualities suited to a Brahmin, gentleness, knowledge, and resignation. In consequence of having reversed my plans, thy son shall follow a warrior's propensities, and use weapons, and fight, and slay. Thy mother's son shall be born with the inclinations of a Brahmin, and be addicted to peace and piety." Satyavati, hearing this, fell at her husband's feet, and said, "My lord, I have done this thing through ignorance. Have compassion on me. Let me not have a son such as thou hast foretold. If such there must be, let it be my grandson, not my son." The Muni, relenting at her distress, replied, "So let it be." Accordingly in due season she gave birth to Jamadani, and her mother brought forth Viswamitra. Satyavati afterwards became the Kausiki river. Jamadani married Renuka, the daughter of Renu, of the family of Ikshwaku, and had by her the destroyer of the Kshatriya race, Parasurama, who was a portion of Narayana, the spiritual guide of the universe. Legend of Parasurama. From the Mahabharata, Jamadani, the son of Richika, was a pious sage, who by the fervor of his devotions, whilst engaged in holy study, obtained entire possession of the Vedas. Having gone to King Prasnajit, he demanded in marriage his daughter Renuka, and the king gave her unto him. The descendant of Bhrigu conducted the princess to his hermitage, and dwelt with her there, and she was contented to partake in his ascetic life. They had 4 sons, and then a 5th, who was Jamadanya, the last but not the least of the brethren. Once when her sons were all absent, to gather the fruits on which they fed, Renuka, who was exact in the discharge of all her duties, went forth to bathe. On her way to the stream she beheld Chitraratha, the prince of Mritikavati, with a garland of lotuses on his neck, sporting with his queen in the water, and she felt envious of their felicity. Defiled by unworthy thoughts, wetted but not purified by the stream, she returned disquieted to the hermitage, and her husband perceived her agitation. Beholding her fallen from perfection, and shorn of the luster of her sanctity, Jamadani reproved her, and was exceeding wroth. Upon this there came her sons from the wood, first the eldest, Rumanwat, then Sushna, then Vasu, and then Viswavasu, and each, as he entered, was successively commanded by his father to put his mother to death. But amazed, and influenced by natural affection, neither of them made any reply. Therefore Jamadani was angry, and cursed them, and they became as idiots, and lost all understanding, and were like unto beasts or birds. Lastly, Rama returned to the hermitage, when the mighty and holy Jamadani said unto him, "Kill thy mother, who has sinned, and do it, son, without repining." Rama accordingly took up his axe, and struck off his mother's head, whereupon the wrath of the illustrious and mighty Jamadani was assuaged, and he was pleased with his son, and said, "Since thou hast obeyed my commands, and done what was hard to be performed, demand from me whatever blessings thou wilt, and thy desires shall be all fulfilled." Then Rama begged of his father these boons. the restoration of his mother to life, with forgetfulness of her having been slain, and purification from all defilement, the return of his brothers to their natural condition, and, for himself, invincibility in single combat, and length of days, and all these did his father bestow. It happened on one occasion, that, during the absence of the Rishi's sons, the mighty monarch Kartavatriya, the sovereign of the Hayaya tribe, endowed by the favor of Dattatreya with 1,000 arms, and a golden chariot that went wheresoever he willed it to go, came to the hermitage of Jamadani, where the wife of the sage received him with all proper respect. The king, inflated with the pride of valor, made no return to her hospitality, but carried off with him by violence the calf of the milch cow of the sacred oblation, and cast down the tall trees surrounding the hermitage. When Rama returned, his father told him what had chanced, and he saw the cow in affliction, and he was filled with wrath. Taking up his splendid bow, Bhargava, the slayer of hostile heroes, assailed Kartavatriya, who had now become subject to the power of death, and overthrew him in battle. With sharp arrows Rama cut off his 1,000 arms, and the king perished. The sons of Kartavatriya, to revenge his death, attacked the hermitage of Jamadani, when Rama was away, and slew the pious and unresisting sage, who called repeatedly, but fruitlessly, upon his valiant son. They then departed, and when Rama returned, bearing fuel from the thickets, he found his father lifeless, and thus bewailed his unmerited fate. Father, in resentment of my actions have you been murdered by wretches as foolish as they are base. By the sons of Kartavatriya are you struck down, as a deer in the forest by the huntsman's shafts. Ill have you deserved such a death, you who have ever trodden the path of virtue, and never offered wrong to any created thing. How great is the crime that they have committed, in slaying with their deadly shafts an old man like you, wholly occupied with pious cares, and engaging not in strife. Much have they to boast of to their fellows and their friends, that they have shamelessly slain a solitary hermit, incapable of contending in arms. Thus lamenting, bitterly and repeatedly, Rama performed his father's last obsequies, and lighted his funeral pile. He then made a vow that he would extirpate the whole Kshatriya race. In fulfillment of this purpose he took up his arms, and with remorseless and fatal rage singly destroyed in fight the sons of Kartavatriya, and after them, whatever Kshatriyas he encountered. Rama, the first of warriors, likewise slew. Thrice 7 times did they clear the earth of the Kshatriya caste, and he filled with their blood the 5 large lakes of Samantapanchaka, from which he offered libations to the race of Bhrigu. There did he behold his sire again, and the son of Richika beheld his son, and told him what to do. Offering a solemn sacrifice to the king of the gods, Jamadanya presented the earth to the ministering priests. To Kashyapa he gave the altar made of gold, 10 fathoms in length, and 9 in height. With the permission of Kashyapa, the Brahmins divided it in pieces amongst them, and they were thence called Kandavyana Brahmins. Having given the earth to Kashyapa, the hero of immeasurable prowess retired to the Mahendra mountain, where he still resides, and in this manner was there enmity between him and the race of Kshatriyas, and thus was the whole earth conquered by Rama. The son of Viswamitra was Sunasvas, the descendant of Bhrigu, given by the gods, and thence named Devarata. Viswamitra had other sons also, amongst whom the most celebrated were Madhuchandas, Kritajaya, Devadeva, Ashtaka, Kakshapa, and Harita. These founded many families, all of whom were known by the name of Kausikas, and intermarried with the families of various rishis. Chap 8. Sons of Ayus, line of Kshatravrita, or kings of Kasi, former birth of Dhanwantari, various names of Pratardana, greatness of Alaka. Ayus, the eldest son of Puravas, married the daughter of Rau, or Arau, by whom he had 5 sons, Nahashur, Kshatravrita, Ramba, Raji, and Ananas. The son of Kshatravrita was Sahatra, who had 3 sons, Kaza, Leza, and Gritsamada. The son of the last was Saunaka, who first established the distinctions of the 4 castes. The son of Kaza was Kasirua, his son was Durgatamas, his son was Dhanwantari, whose nature was exempt from human infirmities, and who in every existence had been master of universal knowledge. In his past life, or when he was produced by the agitation of the Milky Sea, Narayana had conferred upon him the boon, that he should subsequently be born in the family of Kasara, should compose the eightfold system of medical science, and should be thereafter entitled to a share of offerings made to the gods. The son of Dhanwantari was Kechimat, his son was Bhimaratha, his son was Daivodasa, his son was Pratardana, so named from destroying the race of Badrasranya. He had various other appellations, as Satrujit, the victor over his foes, from having vanquished all his enemies, Vatsa, or child, from his fathers frequently calling him by that name, Ritadwara, he whose emblem was truth, being a great observer of veracity, and Kivalayaswa, because he had a horse, Aswa, called Kivalaya. The son of this prince was Alaka, of whom this verse is sung in the present day. For 60,000 and 60,000 years no other youthful monarch except Alaka reigned over the earth. The son of Alaka was Sandati, his son was Sunitha, his son was Sukatu, his son was Dharmaketu, his son was Satyaketu, his son was Vibhu, his son was Suvibhu, his son was Sukumara, his son was Drishtaketu, his son was Vainahatra, his son was Bhaga, his son was Bhagabhumi, from whom also rules for the 4 castes were promulgated. These are the Kasya princes, or descendants of Kaza. We will now enumerate the descendants of Raji. Chap 9. Descendants of Raji, son of Ayus. Indra resigns his throne to him, claimed after his death by his sons, who apostatized from the religion of the Vedas, and are destroyed by Indra. Descendants of Pratikshatra, son of Kshatravrita. Raji had 500 sons, all of unequal daring and vigor. Upon the occurrence of a war between the demons and the gods, both parties inquired of Brahma which would be victorious. The deity replied, that for which Raji shall take up arms. Accordingly the deities immediately repaired to Raji, to secure his alliance, which he promised them, if they would make him their Indra after defeating the gods. To this they answered and said, we cannot profess one thing, and mean another. Our Indra is Prahlada, and it is for him that we wage war. Having thus spoken, they departed, and the gods then came to him on the like errand. He proposed to them the said conditions, and they agreed that he should be their Indra. Raji therefore joined the heavenly host, and by his numerous and formidable weapons destroyed the army of their enemies. When the demons were discomfited, Indra placed the feet of Raji upon his head, and said, thou hast preserved me from a great danger, and I acknowledge thee as my father. Thou art the sovereign chief over all the regions, and I, the Indra of the 3 spheres, am thy son. The Raja smiled, and said, Even be it so. The regard that is conciliated by many agreeable speeches is not to be resisted even when such language proceeds from a foe. Much less should the kind words of a friend fail to win our affection. He accordingly returned to his own city, and Indra remained as his deputy in the government of heaven. When Raji ascended to the skies, his sons, at the instigation of Narada, demanded the rank of Indra as their hereditary right, and as the deity refused to acknowledge their supremacy, they reduced him to submission by force, and usurped his station. After some considerable time had elapsed, the god of 100 sacrifices, Indra, deprived of his share of offerings to the immortals, met with Vrihaspati in a retired place, and said to him, "Cannot you give me a little of the sacrificial butter, even if it were no bigger than a jujube, for I am in want of sustenance?" "If," replied Vrihaspati, "I had been applied to by you before, I could have done anything for you that you wished. As it is, I will endeavor and restore you in a few days to your sovereignty." So saying, he commenced to sacrifice for the purpose of increasing the might of Indra, and of leading the sons of Raji into error, and so effecting their downfall. Misled by their mental fascination, the princes became enemies of the Brahmins, regardless of their duties, and contemners of the precepts of the Vedas, and thus devoid of morality and religion. They were slain by Indra, who by the assistance of the priest of the gods resumed his place in heaven. Whoever hears this story shall retain forever his proper place, and shall never be guilty of wicked acts. Ramba, the third son of Ayus, had no progeny. Kshatravrita had a son named Pratikshatra. His son was Sanjaya, his son was Vijaya, his son was Yajnakrit, his son was Harshavardhana, his son was Sahadeva, his son was Adina, his son was Jayasana, his son was Samkriti, his son was Kshatradaman. These were the descendants of Kshatravrita. I will now mention those of Nahashur. Chap. X. The sons of Nahashur. The sons of Yayati. He is cursed by Sukra, wishes his sons to exchange their vigor for his infirmities. Puru alone consents. Yayati restores him his youth, divides the earth amongst his sons, under the supremacy of Puru. Yati, Yayati, Sanyati, Ayati, Vati, and Kriti were the 6 valiant sons of Nahashur. Yati declined the sovereignty, and Yayati therefore succeeded to the throne. He had 2 wives, Devayani the daughter of Usanas, and Samishta the daughter of Vrishapavna, of whom this genealogical verse is recited. Devayani bore 2 sons, Yadu and Turvasu. Samishta, the daughter of Vrishapavna, had 3 sons, Dhru, Anu, and Puru. Through the curse of Usanas, Yayati became old and infirm before his time, but having appeased his father-in-law, he obtained permission to transfer his decrepitude to anyone who would consent to take it. He first applied to his eldest son Yadu, and said, "Your maternal grandfather has brought this premature decay upon me. By his permission, however, I may transfer it to you for 1,000 years. I am not yet satiate with worldly enjoyments, and wish to partake of them through the means of your youth. Do not refuse compliance with my request." Yadu, however, was not willing to take upon him his father's decay, on which his father denounced an imprecation upon him, and said, "Your posterity shall not possess dominion." He then applied successively to Dhru, Turvasu, and Anu, and demanded of them their juvenile vigor. They all refused, and were in consequence cursed by the king. Lastly he made the same request of Samishta's youngest son, Puru, who bowed to his father, and readily consented to give him his youth, and receive in exchange Yayati's infirmities, saying that his father had conferred upon him a great favor. The king Yayati, being thus endowed with renovated youth, conducted the affairs of state for the good of his people, enjoying such pleasures as were suited to his age and strength, and were not incompatible with virtue. He formed a connection with the celestial nymph Viswaki, and was wholly attached to her, and conceived no end to his desires. The more they were gratified, the more ardent they became, as it is said in this verse, "Desire is not appeased by enjoyment, fire fed with sacrificial oil becomes but the more intense." No one has ever more than enough of rice, or barley, or gold, or cattle, or women. Abandon therefore inordinate desire. When a mind finds neither good nor ill in all objects, but looks on all with an equal eye, then everything yields it pleasure. The wise man is filled with happiness, who escapes from desire, which the feeble-minded can with difficulty relinquish, and which grows not old with the aged. The hair becomes gray, the teeth fall out, as man advances in years, but the love of wealth, the love of life, are not impaired by age. 1,000 years have passed, reflected Yayati, and my mind is still devoted to pleasure. Every day my desires are awakened by new objects. I will therefore now renounce all sensual enjoyment, and fix my mind upon spiritual truth. Unaffected by the alternatives of pleasure and pain, and having nothing I may call my own, I will henceforth roam the forests with the deer. Having made this determination, Yayati restored his youth to Puru, resumed his own decrepitude, installed his youngest son in the sovereignty, and departed to the wood of penance. To Purana. To Turvasu he consigned the southeast districts of his kingdom, the west to Dru, the south to Yadu, and the north to Anu, to govern as viceroys under their younger brother Puru, whom he appointed supreme monarch of the earth. Chap. 11. The Yadava race, or descendants of Yadu. Kartavatri obtains a boon from Dattatreya, takes Ravana prisoner, is killed by Parasurama, his descendants. I will first relate to you the family of Yadu, the eldest son of Yayati, in which the eternal immutable Vishnu descended upon earth in a portion of his essence, of which the glory cannot be described, though forever hymned in order to confer the fruit of all their wishes, whether they desired virtue, wealth, pleasure, or liberation, upon all created beings, upon men, saints, heavenly choristers, spirits of evil, nymphs, centaurs, serpents, birds, demons, gods, sages, Brahmins, and ascetics. Whoever hears the account of the race of Yadu shall be released from all sin, for the Supreme Spirit, that is without form, and which is called Vishnu, was manifested in this family. Yadu had 4 sons, Shahasrajit, Kroshti, Nala, and Raghu. Satyajit was the son of the elder of these, and he had 3 sons, Hayahaya, Venu, and Haya. The son of Hayahaya was Dharmantra, his son was Kunti, his son was Sahunji, his son was Mahishmat, his son was Badrasna, his son was Dardama, his son was Dhanaka, who had 4 sons, Kritavirya, Kritani, Kritavarman, and Kritorjas. Kritavirya's son was Arjuna, the sovereign of the 7 Dwipas, the lord of 1,000 arms. This prince propitiated the sage Dattatreya, the descendant of Atri, who was a portion of Vishnu, and solicited and obtained from him these boons: 1,000 arms, never acting unjustly, subjugation of the world by justice, and protecting it equitably, victory over his enemies, and death by the hands of a person renowned in the three regions of the universe. With these means he ruled over the whole earth with might and justice, and offered 10,000 sacrifices. Of him this verse is still recited: the kings of the earth will assuredly never pursue his steps in sacrifice, in munificence, in devotion, in courtesy, and in self-control. In his reign nothing was lost or injured, and so he governed the whole earth with undiminished health, prosperity, power, and might, for 85,000 years. Whilst sporting in the waters of the Narmada, and elevated with wine, Ravana came on his tour of triumph to the city Mahishmati, and there he who boasted of overthrowing the gods, the Daityas, the Gandharvas and their king, was taken prisoner by Kartavatriya, and confined like a tame beast in a corner of his capital. At the expiration of his long reign Kartavatriya was killed by Parasurama, who was an embodied portion of the mighty Narayana. Of the 100 sons of this king, the 5 principal were Sura, Sarasana, Vrishana, Madhu, and Jayadwara. The son of the last was Tilajanga, who had 100 sons, called after him Tilajangas. The eldest of these was Vitihatra. Another was Bharata, who had 2 sons, Vrisha and Sujati. The son of Vrisha was Madhu. He had 100 sons, the chief of whom was Vrishni, and from him the family obtained the name of Vrishni. From the name of their father, Madhu, they were also called Madhavas, whilst from the denomination of their common ancestor Yadu, the whole were termed Yadavas. Chap 12, Descendants of Kroshti. Jayamagha's connubial affection for his wife Savya. Their descendants kings of Vidarbha and Chedi. Kroshti, the son of Yadu, had a son named Vrijinavat. His son was Swai, his son was Rashadru, his son was Chitraratha, his son was Sasavindu, who was lord of the 14 great gems. He had 100,000 wives and 1,000,000 of sons. The most renowned of them were Prithuyasas, Prithhukaman, Prithujaya, Prithukirti, Prithudana, and Prithusravas. The son of the last of these 6 was Tamas. His son was Usanas, who celebrated 100 sacrifices of the horse. His son was Saitius. His son was Rukmakavaka. His son was Paravrit, who lead 5 sons, Rukmshu, Prithurukman, Jayamagha, Palita, and Harita. To this day the following verse relating to Jayamagha is repeated: of all the husbands submissive to their wives, who have been or who will be, the most eminent is the king Jayamagha, who was the husband of Savya. Savya was barren, but Jayamagha was so much afraid of her, that he did not take any other wife. On one occasion the king, after a desperate conflict with elephants and horse, defeated a powerful foe, who abandoning wife, children, kin, army, treasure, and dominion, fled. When the enemy was put to flight, Jayamagha beheld a lovely princess left alone, and exclaiming, "Save me, father! Save me, brother!" as her large eyes rolled wildly with affright. The king was struck by her beauty, and penetrated with affection for her, and said to himself, "This is fortunate, I have no children, and am the husband of a sterile bride. This maiden has fallen into my hands to rear up to me posterity. I will espouse her. But first I will take her in my car, and convey her to my palace, where I must request the concurrence of the queen in these nuptials." Accordingly he took the princess into his chariot, and returned to his own capital. When Jayamagha's approach was announced, Savya came to the palace gate, attended by the ministers, the courtiers, and the citizens, to welcome the victorious monarch. But when she beheld the maiden standing on the left hand of the king, her lips swelled and slightly quivered with resentment, and she said to Jayamagha, "Who is this light-hearted damsel that is with you in the chariot?" The king, unprepared with a reply, made answer precipitately, through fear of his queen, "This is my daughter-in-law." "I have never had a son," rejoined Savior, "and you have no other children. Of what son of yours then is this girl the wife?" The king, disconcerted by the jealousy and anger which the words of Savior displayed, made this reply to her in order to prevent further contention: "She is the young bride of the future son whom thou shalt bring forth." Hearing this, Savior smiled gently, and said, "So be it," and the king entered into his great palace. In consequence of this conversation regarding the birth of a son having taken place in an auspicious conjunction, aspect, and season, the queen, although past the time of women, became shortly afterwards pregnant, and bore a son. His father named him Vidarbha, and married him to the damsel he had brought home. They had 3 sons, Kratha, Kayaka, and Ramapada. The son of Ramapada was Babru, and his son was Dhriti. The son of Kayaka was Chedi, whose descendants were called the Chedur kings. The son of Kratha was Kunti, his son was Vrishni, his son was Navriti, his son was Daziha, his son was Vyaman, his son was Jaimuta, his son was Vikriti, his son was Bhimaratha, his son was Navaratha, his son was Dasarata, his son was Sakuni, his son was Karambi, his son was Devarata, his son was Devakshatra, his son was Madhu, his son was Anavaratha, his son was Kuravatsa, his son was Anuratha, his son was Purana, his son was Ansu, his son was Satwata, from whom the princes of this house were termed Satwatas. This was the progeny of Jayamagha, by listening to the account of whom a man is purified from his sins. Chap 13. Sons of Satwata. Boa, princes of Mritikavati. Surya, the friend of Satrajit, appears to him in a bodily form, gives him the Syamantaka gem, its brilliance and marvelous properties. Satrajit gives it to Prasanna, who is killed by a lion, the lion killed by the bear Jambavat. Krishna, suspected of killing Prasanna, goes to look for him in the forests, traces the bear to his cave, fights with him for the jewel. The contest prolonged, supposed by his companions to be slain, he overthrows Jambavat, and marries his daughter Jambavati, returns with her and the jewel to Dwaraka, restores the jewel to Satrajit, and marries his daughter Satyabhama. Satrajit murdered by Satadhanwan, avenged by Krishna. Quarrel between Krishna and Balarama. Akrura, possessed of the jewel, leaves Dwaraka. Public calamities. Meeting of the Yadavas. Story of Akrura's birth. He is invited to return, accused by Krishna of having the Syamantaka jewel, produces it in full assembly, it remains in his charge, Krishna acquitted of having purloined it. The sons of Satwata were Bajina, Bhajamana, Divya, Andaka, Davrida, Mahabhoa, and Vrishni. Bhajamana had 3 sons, Nimai, Krukana, and Vrishni, by one wife, and as many by another, Satyajit, Shahasrajit, and Ayutajit. The son of Davrida was Babru, of whom this verse is recited. We hear when afar, and we behold when nigh, that Babru is the first of men, and Davrida is equal to the gods. 66 persons following the precepts of one, and 6,008 who were disciples of the other, obtained immortality. Mahabhoa was a pious prince, his descendants were the Bhajas, the princes of Mritikavati, thence called Martikavatas. Vrishni had 2 sons, Sumitra and Yudhajit, from the former Anamitra and Sini were born. The son of Anamitra was Naina, who had two sons, Prasna and Satrajit. The divine Aditya, the son, was the friend of the latter. On one occasion Satrajit, whilst walking along the seashore, addressed his mind to Surya, and hymned his praises, on which the divinity appeared and stood before him. Beholding him in an indistinct shape, Satrajit said to the sun, "I have beheld thee, Lord, in the heavens as a globe of fire. Now do thou show favor unto me, that I may see thee in thy proper form." On this the sun, taking the jewel called Syamantaka from off his neck, placed it apart, and Satrajit beheld him of a dwarfish stature, with a body like burnished copper, and with slightly reddish eyes. Having offered his adorations, the sun desired him to demand a boon, and he requested that the jewel might become his. The sun presented it to him, and then resumed his place in the sky. Having obtained the spotless gem of gems, Satrajit wore it on his neck, and becoming as brilliant thereby as the sun himself, irradiating all the region with his splendor, he returned to Dwaraka. The inhabitants of that city, beholding him approach, repaired to the eternal male, Purushottama, who, to sustain the burden of the earth, had assumed a mortal form, as Krishna, and said to him, "Lord, assuredly the divine sun is coming to visit you." But Krishna smiled, and said, "It is not the divine sun, but Satrajit, to whom Aditya has presented the Syamantaka gem, and he now wears it. Go and behold him without apprehension." Accordingly they departed. Satrajit having gone to his house, deposited the jewel, which yielded daily 8 loads of gold, and through its marvelous virtue dispelled all fear of portents, wild beasts, fire, robbers, and famine. Achyuta was of opinion that this wonderful gem should be in the possession of Ugrasena, but although he had the power of taking it from Satrajit, he did not deprive him of it, that he might not occasion allied disagreement amongst the family. Satrajit, on the other hand, fearing that Krishna would ask him for the jewel, transferred it to his brother Prasna. Now it was the peculiar property of this jewel, that although it was an inexhaustible source of good to a virtuous person, yet when worn by a man of bad character it was the cause of his death. Prasna, having taken the gem, and hung it round his neck, mounted his horse, and went to the woods to hunt. In the chase he was killed by a lion. The lion, taking the jewel in his mouth, was about to depart, when he was observed and killed by Jambavat, the king of the bears, who carrying off the gem retired into his cave, and gave it to his son Sukumara to play with. When some time had elapsed, and Prasna did not appear, the Yadavas began to whisper one to another, and to say, "This is Krishna's doing. Desirous of the jewel, and not obtaining it, he has perpetrated the murder of Prasna in order to get it into his possession." When these calumnious rumors came to the knowledge of Krishna, he collected a number of the Yadavas, and accompanied by them pursued the course of Prasna by the impressions of his horse's hooves. Ascertaining by this means that he and his horse had been killed by a lion, he was acquitted by all the people of any share in his death. Desirous of recovering the gem, he thence followed the steps of the lion, and at no great distance came to the place where the lion had been killed by the bear. Following the footmarks of the latter, he arrived at the foot of a mountain, where he desired the Yadavas to await him, whilst he continued the track. Still guided by the marks of the feet, he discovered a cavern, and had scarcely entered it when he heard the nurse of Sukumara saying to him, "The lion killed Prasna, the lion has been killed by Jambavat, weep not, Sukumara, the Syamantaka is your own." Thus assured of his object, Krishna advanced into the cavern, and saw the brilliant jewel in the hands of the nurse, who was giving it as a plaything to Sukumara. The nurse soon descried his approach, and marking his eyes fixed upon the gem with eager desire, called loudly for help. Hearing her cries, Jambavat, full of anger, came to the cave, and a conflict ensued between him and Achyuta, which lasted 21 days. The Yadavas who had accompanied the latter waited 7 or 8 days in expectation of his return, but as the foe of Madhu still came not forth, they concluded that he must have met his death in the cavern. It could not have required so many days, they thought, to overcome an enemy, and accordingly they departed, and returned to Dwaraka, and announced that Krishna had been killed. When the relations of Achyuta heard this intelligence, they performed all the obsequial rites suited to the occasion. The food and water thus offered to Krishna in the celebration of his Shraddha served to support his life, and invigorate his strength in the combat in which he was engaged, whilst his adversary, wearied by daily conflict with a powerful foe, bruised and battered in every limb by heavy blows, and enfeebled by want of food, became unable longer to resist him. Overcome by his mighty antagonist, Jambavat cast himself before him and said, "Thou, mighty being, art surely invincible by all the demons, and by the spirits of heaven, earth, or hell. Much less art thou to be vanquished by mean and powerless creatures in a human shape, and still less by such as we are, who are born of brute origin. Undoubtedly thou art a portion of my sovereign Lord Narayana, the defender of the universe." Thus addressed by Jambavat, Krishna explained to him fully that he had descended to take upon himself the burden of the earth, and kindly alleviated the bodily pain which the bear suffered from the fight, by touching him with his hand. Jambavat again prostrated himself before Krishna, and presented to him his daughter Jambavati, as an offering suitable to a guest. He also delivered to his visitor the Syamantaka jewel, although a gift from such an individual was not fit for his acceptance. Yet Krishna took the gem for the purpose of clearing his reputation. He then returned along with his bride Jambavati to Dwaraka. When the people of Dwaraka beheld Krishna alive and returned, they were filled with delight, so that those who were bowed down with years recovered youthful vigor, and all the Yadavas, men and women, assembled round Anakadunjubi, the father of the hero, and congratulated him. Krishna related to the whole assembly of the Yadavas all that had happened, exactly as it had befallen, and restoring the Syamantaka jewel to Satyajit was exonerated from the crime of which he had been falsely accused. He then led Jambavati into the inner apartments. When Satyajit reflected that he had been the cause of the aspersions upon Krishna's character, he felt alarmed, and to conciliate the prince he gave him to wife his daughter Satyabhama. The maiden had been previously sought in marriage by several of the most distinguished Yadavas, as Akrura, Kritavarman and Satyadanwan, who were highly incensed at her being wedded to another, and leagued in enmity against Satyajit. The chief amongst them, with Akrura and Kritavarman, said to Satyadanwan, "This caitiff Satyajit has offered a gross insult to you, as well as to us who solicited his daughter, by giving her to Krishna. Let him not live. Why do you not kill him, and take the jewel? Should Achyuta therefore enter into feud with you, we will take your part." Upon this promise Satyadanwan undertook to slay Satyajit. When news arrived that the sons of Bandu had been burned in house of wax, Krishna, who knew the real truth, set off for Bharanavata to allay the animosity of Duryodhana, and to perform the duties his relationship required. Satyadhanvan, taking advantage of his absence, killed Satyajit in his sleep, and took possession of the gem. Upon this coming to the knowledge of Satyabhama, she immediately mounted her chariot, and, filled with fury at her father's murder, repaired to Brunavata, and told her husband how Satyajit had been killed by Satyadhanvan in resentment of her having been married to another, and how he had carried off the jewel, and she implored him to take prompt measures to avenge such heinous wrong. Krishna, who is ever internally placid, being informed of these transactions, said to Satyabhama, as his eyes flashed with indignation, "These are indeed audacious injuries, but I will not submit to them from so vile a wretch. They must assail the tree, who would kill the birds that there have built their nests. Dismiss excessive sorrow, it needs not your lamentations to excite any wrath." Returning forthwith to Dwaraka, Krishna took Baladeva apart, and said to him, "A lion slew Prasanna, hunting in the forests, and now Satyajit has been murdered by Satyadhanvan. As both these are removed, the jewel which belonged to them is our common right. Up then, ascend your car, and put Satyadhanvan to death." Being thus excited by his brother, Balarama engaged resolutely in the enterprise, but Satyadhanvan, being aware of their hostile designs, repaired to Kritavarman, and required his assistance. Kritavarman, however, declined to assist him, pleading his inability to engage in a conflict with both Baladeva and Krishna. Satyadhanvan, thus disappointed, applied to Akrura, but he said, "You must have recourse to some other protector." "How should I be able to defend you? There is no one even amongst the immortals, whose praises are celebrated throughout the universe, who is capable of contending with the wielder of the discus, at the stamp of whose foot the three worlds tremble, whose hand makes the wives of the Asuras widows, whose weapons no host, however mighty, can resist. No one is capable of encountering the wielder of the plowshare, who annihilates the prowess of his enemies by the glances of his eyes, that troll with the joys of wine, and whose vast plowshare manifests his might, by seizing and exterminating the most formidable foes." "Since this is the case," replied Satyadhanvan, "and you are unable to assist me, at least accept and take care of this jewel." "I will do so," answered Akrura, "if you promise that even in the last extremity you will not divulge its being in my possession." To this Satyadhanvan agreed, and Akrura took the jewel, and the former mounting a very swift mare, one that could travel 100 leagues a day, fled from Dwaraka. When Krishna heard of Satyadhanvan's flight, he harnessed his 4 horses, Savya, Sugriva, Meghapushpa, and Balahaka, to his car, and, accompanied by Balarama, set off in pursuit. The mare held her speed, and accomplished her 100 leagues, but when she reached the country of Mithila, her strength was exhausted, and she dropped down and died. Satyadhanvan, dismounting, continued his flight on foot. When his pursuers came to the place where the mare had perished, Krishna said to Balarama, "Do you remain in the car, whilst I follow the villain on foot, and put him to death. The ground here is bad, and the horses will not be able to drag the chariot across it." Balarama accordingly stayed with the car, and Krishna followed Satyadhanvan on foot. When he had chased him for 2 kos, he discharged his discus, and, although Satyadhanvan was at a considerable distance, the weapon struck off his head. Krishna then, coiling up, searched his body and his dress for the Syamantaka jewel, but found it not. He then returned to Balabhadra, and told him that they had effected the death of Satyadhanvan to no purpose, for the precious gem, the quintessence of all worlds, was not upon his person. When Balabhadra heard this, he flew into a violent rage, and said to Vasudeva, "Shame light upon you, to be thus greedy of wealth. I acknowledge no brotherhood with you. Here lies my path. Go whither you please. I have done with Dwaraka, with you, with all our house. It is of no use to seek to impose upon me with thy perjuries." Thus reviling his brother, who fruitlessly endeavored to appease him, Balabhadra went to the city of Vidya, where Janaka received him hospitably, and there he remained. Vasudeva returned to Dwaraka. It was during his stay in the dwelling of Janaka that Duryodhana, the son of Dhritarashtra, learned from Balabhadra the art of fighting with the mace. At the expiration of 3 years, Ugrasena and other chiefs of the Yadavas, being satisfied that Krishna had not the jewel, went to Vidya, and removed Balabhadra's suspicions, and brought him home. Akrura, carefully considering the treasures which the precious jewels secured to him, constantly celebrated religious rites, and, purified with holy prayers, lived in affluence for 52 years, and through the virtue of that gem there was no dearth nor pestilence in the whole country. At the end of that period, Satrufna, the great-grandson of Satvata, was killed by the Bhujas, and as they were in bonds of alliance with Akrura, he accompanied them in their flight from Dwaraka. From the moment of his departure various calamities, portents, snakes, dearth, plague, and the like, began to prevail, so that he whose emblem is Garuda called together the Yadavas, with Balabhadra and Ugrasena, and recommended them to consider how it was that so many prodigies should have occurred at the same time. On this Andaka, one of the elders of the Yodhu race, thus spake: "Wherever Swifalka, the father of Akrura, dwelt, there famine, plague, dearth, and other visitations were unknown. Once when there was want of rain in the kingdom of Kasarua, Swifalka was brought there, and immediately there fell rain from the heavens. It happened also that the queen of Kasarua conceived, and was quick with a daughter, but when the time of delivery arrived, the child issued not from the womb. 12 years passed away, and still the girl was unborn. Then Kasarua spake to the child, and said, "Daughter, why is your birth thus delayed? Come forth, I desire to behold you. Why do you inflict this protracted suffering upon your mother?" Thus addressed, the infant answered, "If, father, you will present a cow every day to the Brahmins, I shall at the end of 3 years more be born." The king accordingly presented daily a cow to the Brahmins, and at the end of 3 years the damsel came into the world. Her father called her Gandhini, and he subsequently gave her to Swifalka, when he came to his palace for his benefit. Gandhini, as long as she lived, gave a cow to the Brahmins every day. Akrura was her son by Swifalka, and his birth therefore proceeds from a combination of uncommon excellence. When a person such as he is absent from us, is it likely that famine, pestilence, and prodigies should fail to occur? Let him then he invited to return. The faults of men of exalted worth must not be too severely scrutinized. Agreeably to the advice of Urdaka the elder, the Yadavas sent a mission, headed by Kesava, Ugrasena, and Balabhadra, to assure Akrura that no notice would be taken of any irregularity committed by him, and having satisfied him that he was in no danger, they brought him back to Dwaraka. Immediately on his arrival, in consequence of the properties of the jewel, the plague, dearth, famine, and every other calamity and portent, ceased. Krishna, observing this, reflected that the descent of Akrura from Gandhini and Swafalka was a cause wholly disproportionate to such an effect, and that some more powerful influence must be exerted to arrest pestilence and famine. Of a surety, said he to himself, the great Syamantaka jewel is in his keeping, for such I have heard are amongst its properties. This Akrura too has been lately celebrating sacrifice after sacrifice. His own means are insufficient for such expenses. It is beyond a doubt that he has the jewel. Having come to this conclusion, he called a meeting of all the Yadavas at his house, under the pretext of some festive celebration. When they were all seated, and their purport of their assembling had been explained, and the business accomplished, Krishna entered into conversation with Akrura, and, after laughing and joking, said to him, "Kinsman, you are a very prince in your liberality, but we know very well that the precious jewel which was stolen by Sudanwan was delivered by him to you, and is now in your possession, to the great benefit of this kingdom. So let it remain, we all derive advantage from its virtues, but Balabhadra suspects that I have it, and therefore, out of kindness to me, show it to the assembly." When Akrura, who had the jewel with him, was thus taxed, he hesitated what he should do. "If I deny that I have the jewel," thought he, "they will search my person, and find the gem hidden amongst my clothes. I cannot submit to a search." So reflecting, Akrura said to Narayana, the cause of the whole world, "It is true that the Syamantaka jewel was entrusted to me by Sudanwan. When he went from hence, I expected every day that you would ask me for it, and with much inconvenience therefore I have kept it until now. The charge of it has subjected me to so much anxiety, that I have been incapable of enjoying any pleasure, and have never known a moment's ease. Afraid that you would think me unfit to retain possession of a jewel so essential to the welfare of the kingdom, I forbore to mention to you its being in my hands. But now take it yourself, and give the care of it to whom you please." Having thus spoken, Akrura drew forth from his garments a small gold box, and took from it the jewel. On displaying it to the assembly of the Yadavas, the whole chamber where they sat was illuminated by its radiance. "This," said Akrura, "is the Syamantaka gem, which was consigned to me by Sudanwan. Let him to whom it belongs now take it." When the Yadavas beheld the jewel, they were filled with astonishment, and loudly expressed their delight. Balabhadra immediately claimed the jewel as his property jointly with Achyuta, as formerly agreed upon, whilst Satyabhama demanded it as the right, as it had originally belonged to her father. Between these two Krishna considered himself as an ox between the two wheels of a cart, and thus spake to Akrura in the presence of all the Yadavas, "This jewel has been exhibited to the assembly in order to clear my reputation. It is the joint right of Balabhadra and myself, and is the patrimonial inheritance of Satyabhama. But this jewel, to be of advantage to the whole kingdom, should be taken charge of by a person who leads a life of perpetual continence. If worn by an impure individual, it will be the cause of his death. Now as I have 16,000 wives, I am not qualified to have the care of it. It is not likely that Satyabhama will agree to the conditions that would entitle her to the possession of the jewel, and as to Balabhadra, he is too much addicted to wine and the pleasures of sense to lead a life of self-denial. We are therefore out of the question, and all the Yadavas, Balabhadra, Satyabhama, and myself, request you, most bountiful Akrura, to retain the care of the jewel, as you have done hitherto, for the general good, for you are qualified to have the keeping of it. and in your hands it has been productive of benefit to the country. You must not decline compliance with our request." Akrura, thus urged, accepted the jewel, and thenceforth wore it publicly round his neck, where it shone with dazzling brightness, and Akrura moved about like the sun, wearing a garland of light. He who calls to mind the vindication of the character of Krishna from false aspersions, shall never become the subject of unfounded accusation in the least degree, and living in the full exercise of his senses shall be cleansed from every sin. Chap 14. Descendants of Sini, of Anamitra, of Swafalka and Chitraka, of Andaka, the children of Devaka and Jugrasana, the descendants of Bhajamana, children of Zura, his son Vasudeva, his daughter Pritha married to Pandu, her children Yudhishthira and his brothers, also Karna by Aditya, the sons of Pandu by Madri, husbands and children of Zura's other daughters, previous births of Sisupala, the younger brother of Anamitra was Sini, his son was Satyaka, his son was Uyudana, also known by the name of Satyaki, his son was Asanga, his son was Tuni, his son was Yugandhara. These princes were termed Sanyas. In the family of Anamitra, Prisani was born, his son was Swafalka, the sanctity of whose character has been described. The younger brother of Swafalka was named Chitraka. Swafalka had by Gandhini. Besides Akrura, Apamagu, Mridura, Saramjaya, Giri, Kshitrapakshitra, Satrufna, Aramardana, Dharmadris, Drishtasaman, Gandhamajavaha, and Pratavaha. He had also a daughter, Sudara. Devavat and Upadeva were the sons of Akrura. The sons of Chitrika were Prithu and Vipritha, and many others. Andaka had 4 sons, Kakura, Bhajamana, Sachi, Kambale Vahish. The son of Kakura was Vrishta, his son was Kapotaraman, his son was Vilaman, his son was Bhava, who was also called Chandan at Akadunjubi. He was a friend of the Gandharvatambaru. His son was Abhijit, his son was Punavasu, his son was Ahuka, and he had also a daughter named Ahuki. The sons of Ahuka were Devaka and Jugrasana. The former had 4 sons, Devavat, Upadeva, Sudava, and Devarakshita, and 7 daughters, Vrikadeva, Upadeva, Devarakshita, Srideva, Santideva, Sahadeva, and Devaki. All the daughters were married to Vasudeva. The sons of Ugrasana were Kansa, Nyagrada, Sunaman, Kanka, Sanku, Subhumi, Rashtrapala, Yadamushthi, and Tushtamat, and his daughters were Kansa, Kansavati, Sutanu, Rashtrapali, and Kanki. The son of Bhajamana was Vajuratha, his son was Zura, his son was Samin, his son was Pratikshatra, his son was Swayambhua, his son was Hridaka, who had Kritavarman, Satadanu, Devamahusha, and others. Zura, the son of Devamahusha, was married to Marisha, and had by her 10 sons. On the birth of Vasudeva, who was one of these sons, the gods, to whom the future is manifest, foresaw that the divine being would take a human form in his family, and thereupon they sounded with joy the drums of heaven. From this circumstance Vasudeva was also called Anakadunbubi. His brothers were Devabhaga, Devasravas, Anadrishti, Karandaka, Vatsabalaka, Srinjaya, Syama, Samaka, and Ganjusha, and his sisters were Pritha, Srutadeva, Shrutakirti, Shrutasravas, and Rajadadevi. Zura had a friend named Kuntibhua, to whom, as he had no children, the presented in due form his daughter Pritha. She was married to Pandu, and bore him Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna, who were in fact the sons of the deities Dharma, Vayu, Air, and Indra. Whilst she was yet unmarried, also, she had a son named Karna, begotten by the divine Aditya, the sun. Bandu had another wife, named Madri, who had by the twin sons of Aditya, Nasatya and Asra, 2 sons, Nakula and Sahadeva. Srutadeva was married to the Karashur prince of Ridasaman, and bore him the fierce Asura Dantavaktra. Drishtaketu, Raja of Kakya, married Srutakirti, and had by her Santadana and 4 other sons, known as the 5 Kakyas. Jayasena, king of Avanti, married Rajadadevi, and had Vindu and Anavinda. Shrutasravas was wedded to Damaghashur, Raja of Chedi, and bore him Sisupala. This prince was in a former existence the unrighteous but valiant monarch of the Daityas, Hiranyakasipu, who was killed by the divine guardian of creation, in the man-lion Avatara. He was next the 10-headed sovereign Ravana, whose unequaled prowess, strength, and power were overcome by the Lord of the 3 worlds, Rama, having been killed by the deity in the form of Raghava. He had long enjoyed the reward of his virtues in exemption from an embodied state, but had now received birth once more as Sisupala, the son of Damaghashur, king of Chedi. In this character he renewed, with greater inveteracy than ever, his hostile hatred towards the god surnamed Pundarakashur, a portion of the Supreme Being, who had descended to lighten the burdens of the earth, and was in consequence slain by him. But from the circumstance of his thoughts being constantly engrossed by the Supreme Being, Sisupala was united with him after death, for the Lord giveth to those to whom he is favorable whatever they desire, and he bestows a heavenly and exalted station even upon those whom he slays in his displeasure. Chap. 15. Explanation of the reason why Sisupala in his previous births as Hiranyakasipu in Ravana was not identified with Vishnu on being slain by him, and was so identified when killed as Sisupala. The wives of Vasudeva, his children, Balarama and Krishna his sons by Devaki, born apparently of Rohini and Yasoda. The wives and children of Krishna. Multitude of the descendants of Yadu. Maitreya, most eminent of all who cultivate piety, I am curious to hear from you, and you are able to explain to me, how it happened that the same being who when killed by Vishnu as Hiranyakasipu and Ravana obtained enjoyments which, though scarcely attainable by the immortals, were but temporary, should have been absorbed into the eternal Hari when slain by him in the person of Sisupala. Parasara, when the divine author of the creation, preservation, and destruction of the universe accomplished the death of Hiranyakasipu, he assumed a body composed of the figures of a lion and a man, so that Hiranyakasipu was not aware that his destroyer was Vishnu, although therefore the quality of purity, derived from exceeding merit, had been attained, yet his mind was perplexed by the predominance of the property or passion, and the consequence of that intermixture was, that he reaped, as the result of his death by the hands of Vishnu, only unlimited power and enjoyment upon earth. As Dasanana, the sovereign of the 3 spheres, he did not obtain absorption into the Supreme Spirit, that is without beginning or end, because his mind was not wholly dedicated to that sole object. So also Dasanana, being entirely subject to the passion of love, and engrossed completely by the thoughts of Janaki, could not comprehend that the son of Dasarata whom he beheld was in reality the divine Achyuta. At the moment of his death he was impressed with the notion that his adversary was immortal, and therefore the fruit he derived from being slain by Vishnu was confined to his birth in the illustrious family of the kings of Chedi, and the exercise of extensive dominion. In this situation many circumstances brought the names of Vishnu to his notice, and on all these occasions the enmity that had accumulated through successive births influenced his mind, and in speaking constantly with disrespect of Achyuta, he was ever repeating his different appellations. Whether walking, eating, sitting, or sleeping, his animosity was never addressed, and Krishna was ever present to his thoughts in his ordinary semblance, having eyes as beautiful as the leaf of the lotus, clad in bright yellow raiment, decorated with a garland, with bracelets on his arms and wrists, and a diadem on his head, having 4 robust arms, bearing the conch, the discus, the mace, and the lotus, thus uttering his names, even though in malediction, and dwelling upon his image, though in enmity. He beheld Krishna, when inflicting his death, radiant with resplendent weapons, bright with ineffable splendor in his own essence as the Supreme Being, and all his passion and hatred ceased, and he was purified from every defect, being killed by the discus of Vishnu. At the instant he thus meditated, all his sins were consumed by his divine adversary, and he was blended with him by whose might he had been slain. I have thus replied to your inquiries. He by whom the divine Vishnu is named or called to recollection, even in enmity, obtains a reward that is difficult of attainment to the demons and the gods. How much greater shall be his recompense who glorifies the deity in fervor and in faith. Vasudeva, also called Anakadandubi, had Rohini, Puravi, Bhadra, Madhira, Devaki, and several other wives. His sons by Rohini were Balabhadra, Sarana, Saru, Damada, and others. Balabhadra espoused Revati, and had by her Nisatu and Dulmukha. The sons of Sarana were Mashti, Mashtamat, Sisut, Satyadrati, and others. Bhadraswa, Bhadrabayu, Dugama, Bhuta, and others, were born in the family of Rohini, of the race of Puru. The sons of Vasudeva by Madhira were Nanda, Upananda, Kritaka, and others. Bhadra bore him Upani, Gada, and others. By his wife Vasili he had one son named Kausika. Devaki bore him 6 sons, Kirtamat, Sushna, Udayan, Bhadrasana, Ritadasa, and Bhadradiya, all of whom Kansa put to death. When Devaki was pregnant the 7th time, Yoganidra, the sleep of devotion, sent by Vishnu, extricated the embryo from its maternal womb at midnight, and transferred it to that of Rohini, and from having been thus taken away, the child, who was Balarama, received the name of Sankarsana. Next, the divine Vishnu himself, the root of the vast universal tree, inscrutable by the understandings of all gods, demons, sages, and men, past, present, or to come, adored by Brahma and all the deities, he who is without beginning, middle, or end, being moved to relieve the earth of her load, descended into the womb of Devaki, and was born as her son Vasudeva. Yoganidra, proud to execute his orders, removed the embryo to Yasoda, the wife of Nanda the cowherd. At his birth the earth was relieved from all iniquity, the sun, moon, and planets shone with unclouded splendor, all fear of calamitous portents was dispelled, and universal happiness prevailed. From the moment he appeared, all mankind were led into the righteous path in him. Whilst this powerful being resided in this world of mortals, he had 16,100 wives. Of these the principal were Rukmani, Satyabhama, Jambavati, Chittihasini, and 4 others. By these the universal form, who is without beginning, begot 180,000 sons, of whom 13 are most renowned, Pradama, Charudishna, Samba, and others. Pradama married Kakadwati, the daughter of Rukmin, and had by her Aniruddha. Aniruddha married Subhadra, the granddaughter of the same Rukmin, and she bore him a son named Vajra. The son of Vajra was Bhu, and his son was Sucharu. In this manner the descendants of Yadu multiplied, and there were many hundreds of thousands of them, so that it would be impossible to repeat their names in hundreds of years. 2 verses relating to the Maharant. The domestic instructors of the boys in the use of arms amounted to 3,80 lakhs, or 38 millions. Who shall enumerate the whole of the mighty men of the Yadava race, who were tens of 10,000s and hundreds of 100,000s in number. Those powerful deities who were killed in the conflicts between them and the gods were born again upon earth, as men, as tyrants and oppressors, and, in order to check their violence, the gods also descended to the world of mortals, and became members of the 101 branches of the family of Yadu. Vishnu was to them a teacher and a ruler, and all the Yadavas were obedient to his commands. Whoever listens frequently to this account of the origin of the heroes of the race of Vrishni, shall be purified from all sin, and obtain the sphere of Vishnu. Chap. 16. Descendants of Turvasut Parasara. I shall now summarily give you an account of the descendants of Turvasut. The son of Turvasa was Vani, his son was Gobanu, his son was Trasamba, his son was Karandama, his son was Maratha. Maratha had no children, and he therefore adopted Dushyanta, of the family of Puru, by which the line of Turvasu merged into that of Puru. This took place in consequence of the malediction denounced on his son by Yayati. Chap. 17. Descendants of Dhruva. The son of Dhruva was Babru, his son was Setu, his son was Aradwat, his son was Gandhara, his son was Dharma, his son was Drita, his son was Duryaman, his son was Prashitas, who had 100 sons, and they were the princes of the lawless Mlechas or barbarians of the north. Chap. 18. Descendants of Anu. Countries and towns named after some of them, as Anga, Banga, and others. Anu, the 4th son of Yayati, had 3 sons, Sabanara, Chagzushur, and Paramkshu. The son of the first was Kalanara, his son was Saranjaya, his son was Puranjaya, his son was Janamjaya, his son was Mahamani, his son was Mahamanas, who had 2 sons, Uzinara and Titikshu. Uzinara had 5 sons, Sivi, Trina, Gara, Krimi, Davan. Sivi had 4 sons, Vrishadaba, Suvira, Kakya, and Madra. Titikshu had 1 son, Ushadratha, his son was Hema, his son was Sutapas, his son was Bali, on whose wife 5 sons were begotten by Durgatamas, or Anga, Banga, Kalinga, Sama, and Pundra, and their descendants, and the 5 countries they inhabited, were known by the same names. The son of Anga was Para, his son was Devaratha, his son was Dharmaratha, his son was Chitraratha, his son was Ramapada, also called Dasarata, to whom, being childless, Dasarata, the son of gave his daughter Santa to be adopted. After this, Ramapada had a son named Chacharanga, his son was Prithulakshur, his son was Champa, who founded the city of Champa. The son of Champa was Hariyamga, his son was Bhadraratha, who had 2 sons, Vrahatkarman and Vrahadratha. The son of the first was Vrahadbanu, his son was Vrahanmanas, his son was Jayadratha, who, by a wife who was the daughter of a Kshatriya father and Brahmani mother, had a son named Vijaya, his son was Dhriti, his son was Dhritavirata, his son was Satyakaman, his son was Adhirata, who found Karna in a basket on the banks of the Ganges, where he had been exposed by his mother, Pritha. The son of Karna was Vrishasana. These were the Anga kings. You shall next hear who were the descendants of Puru. Chap. 19. Descendants of Puru. Birth of Bharata, the son of Dushyanta. His son's guild adopts Bharadwaja or Vatita. Hastin, founder of Hastinapa. Sons of Ajamya, and the races derived from them, as Panchalas, etc. Kripa and Kripi found by Santanu. Descendants of Rikshaw, the son of Ajamya. Kurukshetra named from Kuru. Jarasandha and others, kings of Magadha. The son of Puru was Janamjaya, his son was Prachinvat, his son was Pravira, his son was Menasu, his son was Byada, his son was Sudama, his son was Bahugava, his son was Samyati, his son was Ahamyati, his son was Raudraswa, who had 10 sons, Ritiyu, Kakshiyu, Standaliyu, Gritiyu, Jaliyu, Staliyu, Sandatiyu, Daniyu, Vaniyu, and Varatiyu. The son of Ritiyu was Rantinara, whose sons were Dansu, Apratarata, and Dhruva. The son of the second of these was Kanwa, and his son was Meditathi, from whom the Kanwayana Brahmanas descended. Anla was the son of Tansu, and he had 4 sons, of whom Dushyanta was the elder. The son of Dushyanta was the Emperor Bharata. A verse explanatory of his name is chanted by the gods. The mother is only the receptacle, it is the father by whom a son is begotten. Cherish thy son, Dushyanta, treat not Sakuntala with disrespect. Sons, who are born from the paternal loins, rescue their progenitors from the infernal regions. Thou art the parent of this boy. Sakuntala has spoken truth. From the expression cherish. Bharaswa, the prince was called Bharata. Bharata had by different wives 9 sons, but they were put to death by their own mothers, because Bharata remarked that they bore no resemblance to him, and the women were afraid that he would therefore desert them. The birth of his sons being thus unavailing, Bharata sacrificed to the Maruts, and they gave him Bharadwaja, the son of Vrihaspati by Momata, the wife of Utathaya, expelled by the kick of Dugatamas, his half-brother, before his time. This verse explains the purport of his appellation. Silly woman, said Vrihaspati, cherish this child of 2 fathers, Pradwajam. No, Vrihaspati, replied Momata, do you take care of him? So saying, they both abandoned him, but from their expressions the boy was called Bharadwaja. He was also termed Vatita, in allusion to the unprofitable, Vatita, birth of the sons of Bharata. The son of Vatita was Bhavanmanu, his sons were many, and amongst them the chief were Vrihatkshatra, Mahavirya, Nara, and Garga. The son of Nara was Samkriti. His sons were Ruchiradi and Rantidava. The son of Garga was Sini, and their descendants called Garjas and Sanias, although Kshatriyas by birth, became Brahmins. The son of Mahavirya was Urukshaya, who had 3 sons, Triyarana, Pushkarin, and Kapi, the last of whom became a Brahmin. The son of Vrihatkshatra was Sahatra, whose son was Hastin, who founded the city of Hastinapa. The sons of Hastin were Ajamya, Dwimya, and Purumya. One son of Ajamya was Kanwa, whose son was Meditathi. His other son was Vrihadishu, whose son was Vrihadvasu, his son was Vrihatkarman, his son was Jayadratha, his son was Viswajit, his son was Sinajit, whose sons were Ruchiraswa, Kasya, Dredanush, and Vasahanu. The son of Ruchiraswa was Prithusna, his son was Para, his son was Nipa. He had 100 sons, of whom Samara, the principal, was the ruler of Kampalia. Samara had 3 sons, Para, Sampara, Sardaswa. The son of Para was Prithu, his son was Sukriti, his son was Vibratra, his son was Anuha, who married Kritwe, the daughter of Suka, the son of Vyasa, and had by her Brahmadatta. His son was Viswaksana, his son was Udaksana, and his son was Balata. The son of Dwemya was Yavanara, his son was Dritamat, his son was Satyadrati, his son was Dranmai, his son was Supaswa, his son was Sumiti, his son was Sanatamat, his son was Krita, to whom Hiranyanabha taught the philosophy of the Yoga, and he compiled 24 Sanhitas, or compendia, for the use of the Eastern Brahmins, who study the Samaveda. The son of Krita was Yagrayuda, by whose prowess the Nipa race of Kshatriyas was destroyed. His son was Kshamya, his son was Suvira, his son was Nripanjaya, his son was Bahuratha. These were all called Pauravas. Ajamya had a wife called Nilini, and by her he had a son named Nila. His son was Santi, his son was Susanti, his son was Purujanu, his son was Chaksu, his son was Hariyaswa, who had 5 sons, Mugala, Srinjaya, Vrihadishu, Pravira, and Kampilya. Their father said, "These my 5, Pancha, sons are able, Alam, to protect the countries," and hence they were termed the Panchalas. From Mugala descended the Morgalia Brahmins. He had also a son named Bhaswa, who had 2 children, twins, a son and daughter, Divodasa and Ahalya. The son of Saradwat or Gautama by Ahalya was Satananda. His son was Satyadrati, who was a proficient in military science. Being enamored of the nymph Urvasi, Satyadrati was the parent of 2 children, a boy and a girl. Santanu, a Raja, whilst hunting, found these children exposed in a clump of long sara grass, and, compassionating their condition, took them, and brought them up. As they were nurtured through pity, Kripa, they were called Kripa and Kripi. The latter became the wife of Drona, and the mother of Aswathaman. The son of Divodasa was Maitreyu, his son was Kayavana, his son was Sudasa, his son was Sordasa, also called Sahadeva, his son was Samaka. He had 100 sons, of whom Jantu was the eldest, and Prishata the youngest. The son of Prishata was Drupada, his son was Drishtadama, his son was Drishtaketu. Another son of Ajamya was named Rikshaw, his son was Samvarana, his son was Kuru, who gave his name to the holy district Kurukshetra. His sons were Sudanush, Janu, Parikshit, and many others. The son of Sudanush was Sahatra, his son was Kayavana, his son was Kritaka, his son was Aprachara the Vasu, who had 7 children, Vrihadratha, Pratyagra, Kazamba, Mavla, Matsya, and others. The son of Vrihadratha was Kusagra, his son was Rishabha, his son was Pushpavat, his son was Satyadrata, his son was Sudanwan, and his son was Jantu. Vrihadratha had another son, who being born in 2 parts, which were put together, Sandita, by a female fiend named Jara, he was denominated Jarasandha. His son was Sahadeva, his son was Somapi, his son was Srutasravas. These were kings of Magadha. Chap 20. descendants of Kuru. Devapi abdicates the throne, assumed by Santanu. He is confirmed by the Brahmins, Bhishma his son by Ganga. His other sons, birth of Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vijaya. The 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, the 5 sons of Pandu, married to Draupadi, their posterity, Parikshit, the grandson of Arjuna, the reigning king. Parikshit, the son of Kuru, had 4 sons, Janamejaya, Srutasena, Ugrasena, and Bhimasena. The son of Janu was Zuratha, his son was Vijayaratha, his son was Sarvabhauma, his son was Jayasnuaravan, his son was Ayutayasu, his son was Akradana, one of his sons was Devatathi, and another was called Riksha. His son was Dilipa, his son was Pratipa, who had 3 sons, Devapi, Santanu, and Balika. The first adopted in childhood of forest life, and Santanu became king. Of him this verse is spread through the earth. Santanu is his name, because if he lays his hands upon an old man, he restores him to youth, and by him men obtain tranquility. Santi. In the kingdom over which Santanu ruled there was no rain for 12 years. Apprehensive that the country would become a desert, the king assembled the Brahmins, and asked them why no rain fell, and what fault he had committed. They told him that he was as it were a younger brother married before an elder, for he was in the enjoyment of the earth, which was the right of his elder brother Devapi. What then am I to do? Said the Raja, to which they replied, until the gods shall be displeased with Devapi, by his declining from the path of righteousness, the kingdom is his, and to him therefore you should resign it. When the minister of the king, Asmarisrin, heard this, he collected a number of ascetics who taught doctrines opposed to those of the Vedas, and sent them into the forest, where meeting with Devapi, they perverted the understanding of the simple-minded prince, and led him to adopt heretical notions. In the meantime, Santanu, being much distressed to think that he had been guilty of the offense intimated by the Brahmins, sent them before him into the woods, and then proceeded thither himself, to restore the kingdom to his elder brother. When the Brahmins arrived at the hermitage of Devapi, they informed him, that, according to the doctrines of the Vedas, succession to a kingdom was the right of the elder brother, but he entered into discussion with them, and in various ways advanced arguments which had the defect of being contrary to the precepts of the Vedas. When the Brahmins heard this, they turned to Santanu, and said, "Come hither, Raja, you need give yourself no further trouble in this matter, the dearth is at an end, this man is fallen from his state, for he has uttered words of disrespect to the authority of the eternal, untreated Veda, and when the elder brother is degraded, there is no sin in the prior espousals of his junior." Santanu thereupon returned to his capital, and administered the government as before, and his elder brother Devapi being degraded from his caste by repeating doctrines contrary to the Vedas, Indra poured down abundant rain, which was followed by plentiful harvests. The son of Balika was Somadatta, who had 3 sons, Bari, Barisravas, and Salabhama. The son of Santanu was the illustrious and learned Bhishma, who was born to him by the holy river goddess, Ganga, and he had by his wife Satyavati 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. Chitrangada, whilst yet a youth, was killed in a conflict with a Gandhaba, also called Chitrangada. Vichitravirya married Amba and Ambalika, the daughters of the king of Kasi, and indulging too freely in connubial rights, fell into a consumption, of which he died. By command of Satyavati, my son Krishnadwaipayana, ever obedient to his mother's wishes, begot upon the widows of his brother the princes Dhritarashtra and Pandu, and upon a female servant, Vijaya. Dhritarashtra had Duryodhana, Dusasana, and other sons, to the number of 100. Pandu, having incurred the curse of a deer, whose mate he had killed in the chase, was deterred from procreating children, and his wife Kunti bare to him in consequence 3 sons, who were begotten by the deities Dharma, Vayu, and Indra, namely, Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna, and his wife Madri had 2 sons, Nakula and Sahadeva, by the celestial sons of Aswini. These had each a son by Draupadi. The son of Yudhishthira was Prativandaya, of Bhima, Shrutasoma, of Arjuna, Shrutakirti, of Nakula, Sitanika, and of Sahadeva, Srutakarman. The Pandavas had also other sons. By his wife Yudhaya, Yudhishthira had Devaka. The son of Bhima by Hidimba was Ghatotkach, and he had also Savitrika by his wife Kasi. The son of Sahadeva by Vijaya was Sahatra, and Niramitra was the son of Nakula by Kanumati. Arjuna had Iravat by the serpent Nymphalupai, Babruvahana, who was adopted as the son of his maternal grandfather, by the daughter of the king of Manipura, and, by his wife Subhadra Abhimanyu, who even in extreme youth was renowned for his valor and his strength, and crushed the chariots of his foes in fight. The son of Abhimanyu by his wife Uttara was Parikshit, who, after the Kurus were all destroyed, was killed in his mother's womb by the magic Brahma weapon, hurled by Aswatthama. He was however restored to life by the clemency of that being whose feet receive the homage of all the demons and the gods, and who for his own pleasure had assumed a human shape, Krishna. This prince, Parikshit, now reigns over the whole world with undivided sway. Chap 21. Future kings, descendants of Parikshit, ending with Kshmuka. I will now enumerate the kings who will reign in future periods. The present monarch, Parikshit, will have 4 sons, Janamjaya, Srutasana, Ugrasena, and Bhimasena. The son of Janamjaya will be Sitanika, who will study the Vedas under Yajnavalkya, and military science with Kripa, but becoming dissatisfied with sensual enjoyments, he will acquire spiritual knowledge from the instructions of Saunaka, and ultimately obtain salvation. His son will be Aswamedadatta, a son given by the gods in reward for the sacrifice of a horse. His son will be Asima-Krishna. His son will be Nikakara, who will remove the capital to Kausambi, in consequence of Hastinapura being washed away by the Ganges. His son will be Ushana. His son will be Chitraratha. His son will be Vrishnamat. His son will be Sushna. His son will be Sunitha. His son will be Richa. His son will be Nrichaksut. His son will be Sukhihala. His son will be Paraplava. His son will be Sunaya. His son will be Medavin. His son will be Nripanjaya. His son will be Mridu. His son will be Tigma. His son will be Vrihadratha. His son will be Vasudana, and his son will be another Satanika. His son will be Udayana. His son will be Ahinara. His son will be Kandapani. His son will be Niramitra. His son will be Kshmuka, of whom this verse is recited, the race which gave origin to Brahmins and Kshatriyas, and which was purified by regal sages, terminated with Kshmuka, in the Kali age. Chap 22. Future kings of the family of Ikshwaku, ending with Sumitra. I will now repeat to you the future princes of the family of Ikshwaku. The son of Vrihadbala will be Vrihatkshana. His son will be Urakshipa. His son will be Vatsa. His son will be Vatsavyuha. His son will be Pratavyamana. His son will be Devakara. his son will be Sahadeva, his son will be Vrihadaswa, his son will be Bhanuratha, his son will be Supratitha, his son will be Marudava, his son will be Sunakshatra, his son will be Kinara, his son will be Antarukshor, his son will be Shuvana, his son will be Amatrajit, his son will be Vrihadra, his son will be Dharman, his son will be Kritanjaya, his son will be Rananjaya, his son will be Sanjaya, his son will be Sakyur, his son will be Sudhadana, his son will be Rajala, his son will be Prasnajit, his son will be Kshudraka, his son will be Kandaka, his son will be Suratha, his son will be Sumatra. These are the kings of the family of Ikshwaku, descended from Vrihadbala. This commemorative verse is current concerning them. The race of the descendants of Ikshwaku will terminate with Sumatra. It will end in the Kali age with him. Chapter 23. Future kings of Magadha, descendants of Vrihadratha. I will now relate to you the descendants of Vrihadratha, who will be the kings of Magadha. There have been several powerful princes of this dynasty, of whom the most celebrated was Jarasandha. His son was Sahadeva, his son is Somapi, his son will be Srutavat, his son will be Ayutthayas, his son will be Niramitra, his son will be Sukshatra, his son will be Vrihatkarman, his son will be Sanajit, his son will be Srutanjaya, his son will be Vipra, his son will be Sachi, his son will be Kshamya, his son will be Suvarata, his son will be Dharma, his son will be Suzuma, his son will be Drasana, his son will be Sumati, his son will be Shuvala, his son will be Sunita, his son will be Satyajit, his son will be Viswajit, his son will be Rapunjaya. These are the Vrihadраthas, who will reign for 1,000 years. Chapter 24. Future kings of Magadha. 5 princes of the line of Pradyota, 10 Sasunagas, 9 Nandas, 10 Mauryas, 10 Sungas, 4 Kanwas, 30 Andrabhratyas. Kings of various tribes and castes, and periods of their rule. Ascendancy of barbarians, different races in different regions. Period of universal iniquity and decay. Coming of Vishnu as Kalki, destruction of the wicked, and restoration of the practices of the Vedas. End of the Kali, and return of the Krita. Age, duration of the Kali. Verses chanted by earth, and communicated by Asita to Janaka. End of the 4th book. The last of the Vrihadratha dynasty, Rapunjaya, will have a minister named Sunaka, who having killed his sovereign, will place his son Pradyota upon the throne. His son will be Palaka, his son will be Visakayupa, his son will be Janaka, and his son will be Nandavardhana. These 5 kings of the house of Pradyota will reign over the earth for 138 years. The next prince will be Sisunaga, his son will be Kakavana, his son will be Kshimadharman, his son will be Kshatrojas, his son will be Vidmaisara, his son will be Ajatasatru, his son will be Darbaka, his son will be Udayaswa, his son will also be Nandavardhana, and his son will be Mahanandi. These 10 Sasunagas will be kings of the earth for 362 years. The son of Mahananda will be born of a woman of the Sudra or servile class. His name will be Nanda, called Mahapadma, for he will be exceedingly avaricious. Like another Parasurama, he will be the annihilator of the Kshatriya race. For after him the kings of the earth will be Sudras. He will bring the whole earth under one umbrella. He will have 8 sons, Sumalya and others, who will reign after Mahapadma, and he and his sons will govern for 100 years. The Brahman Kautilya will root out the 9 Nandas upon the cessation of the race of Nanda. The Mauryas will possess the earth. For Kautilya will place Chandragupta on the throne. his son will be Vindhusara, his son will be Azekavardhana, his son will be Suazas, his son will be Dasarata, his son will be Sangata, his son will be Slazuka, his son will be Somasaman, his son will be Sazadaman, and his successor will be Vrahadratha. These are the 10 Mauryas, who will reign over the earth for 137 years. The dynasty of the Sungas will next become possessed of the sovereignty, for Pushpamitra, the general of the last Maurya prince, will put his master to death, and ascend the throne. His son will be Agnimitra, his son will be Sajishtha, his son will be Vasumitra, his son will be Ardraka, his son will be Pulandaka, his son will be Goshavasu, his son will be Vajramitra, his son will be Bhagavata, his son will be Devabhuti. These are the 10 Sungas, who will govern the kingdom for 112 years. Devabhuti, the last Sunga prince, being addicted to immoral indulgences, his minister, the Kanwa named Vasudeva, will murder him, and usurp the kingdom. His son will be Bhumimitra, his son will be Narayana, his son will be Sazaman. These 4 Kanwas will be kings of the earth for 45 years. Sazaman the Kanwa will be killed by a powerful servant named Sipraka, of the Andhra tribe, who will become king, and found the Andrabhritya dynasty. He will be succeeded by his brother Krishna, his son will be Sri Satukani, his son will be Purnatsanga, his son will be Satukani. Second, his son will be Lambadara, his son will be Ivilaka, his son will be Meghaswati, his son will be Patamat, his son will be Arishtakarman, his son will be Hala, his son will be Tulaka, his son will be Pravilasana, his son will be Sundara, named Satukani, his son will be Chakora Satukani, his son will be Sivaswati, his son will be Gamatiputra, his son will be Pulimat, his son will be Sivasri Satukani, his son will be Sivaskanda, his son will be Yajnasri, his son will be Vijaya, his son will be Chandrasri, his son will be Pulamakish. These 30 Andrabhritya kings will reign 456 years. After these, various races will reign, as 7 Abhiras, 10 Gardabas, 16 Sakas, 8 Yavanas, 14 Tusharas, 13 Mundas, 11 Mornas, altogether 79 princes, who will be sovereigns of the earth for 1,390 years, and then 11 Puras will be kings for 300 years. When they are destroyed, the Kailakla Yavanas will be kings, the chief of whom will be Vindhyasakti, his son will be Puranjaya, his son will be Ramakandra, his son will be Adama, from whom will be Varanga, Kritanandana, Sudanandi, Nandiyasas, Sisuka, and Pravira. These will rule for 106 years. From them will proceed 13 sons, then 3 Balikas, and Pushpamitra, and Patumitra, and others, to the number of 13, will rule over Mekhala. There will be 9 kings in the 7 Goalas, and there will be as many Nshada princes. In Magadha a sovereign named Viswasvataka will establish other tribes. He will extirpate the Kshatriya or martial race, and elevate fishermen, barbarians, and Brahmins, and other castes, to power. The 9 Nagas will reign in Padmavati, Kantapuri, and Mathura, and the Guptas of Magadha along the Ganges to Prayaga. A prince named Devarakshita will reign, in a city on the seashore, over the Kosalas, Odras, Pundras, and Tamraliptas. The Gahas will possess Kalinga, Mahihaka, and the mountains of Mahendra. The race of Mananu will occupy the countries of the Nishadas, Naimishikas, and Kalatoyas. The people called Kanakas will possess the Amazon country, and that called Mushika. Men of the three tribes, but degraded, and Abhiras and Sudras, will occupy Saurashtra, Avanti, Zura, Abhuda, and Marubhumi, and Sudras, outcasts, and barbarians will be masters of the banks of the Indus, Davaka, the Chandrabhaga, and Kashmir. These will all be contemporary monarchs, reigning over the earth, kings of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows. They will seize upon the property of their subjects. They will be of limited power, and will for the most part rapidly rise and fall. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable, and they will display but little piety. The people of the various countries intermingling with them will follow their example, and the barbarians being powerful in the patronage of the princes, whilst purer tribes are neglected, the people will perish. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day, until the world will be wholly depraved. Then property alone will confer rank, wealth will be the only source of devotion, passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes, falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation, and women will be objects merely of sensual gratification. Earth will be venerated but for its mineral treasures. The Brahmanical thread will constitute a Brahman. External types, as the staff and red garb, will be the only distinctions of the several orders of life. Dishonesty will be the universal means of subsistence. Weakness will be the cause of dependence. Menace and presumption will be substituted for learning. Liberality will be devotion. Simple ablution will be purification. Mutual assent will be marriage. Fine clothes will be dignity, and water afar off will be esteemed a holy spring. Amidst all castes he who is the strongest will reign over a principality thus vitiated by many faults. The people, unable to bear the heavy burdens imposed upon them by their avaricious sovereigns, will take refuge amongst the valleys of the mountains, and will be glad to feed upon wild honey, herbs, roots, fruits, flowers, and leaves. Their only covering will be the bark of trees, and they will be exposed to the cold, and wind, and sun, and rain. No man's life will exceed 23 years. Thus in the Kali age shall decay constantly proceed, until the human race approaches its annihilation. When the practices taught by the Vedas and the institutes of law shall nearly have ceased, and the close of the Kali age shall be nigh, a portion of that divine being who exists of his own spiritual nature in the character of Brahma, and who is the beginning and the end, and who comprehends all things, shall descend upon earth. He will be born in the family of Vishnu Yasas, an eminent Brahmin of Sambala village, as Kalki, endowed with the 8 superhuman faculties. By his irresistible might he will destroy all the mlechas and thieves, and all whose minds are devoted to iniquity. He will then re-establish righteousness upon earth, and the minds of those who live at the end of the Kali age shall be awakened, and shall be as pellucid as crystal. The men who are thus changed by virtue of that peculiar time shall be as the seeds of human beings, and shall give birth to a race who shall follow the laws of the Krita age, or age of purity, as it is said, when the sun and moon, and the lunar asterism Dishaya, and the planet Jupiter, are in one mansion, the Krita age shall return. Thus, most excellent Muni, the kings who are past, who are present, and who are to be, have been enumerated. From the birth of Parikshit to the coronation of Nanda it is to be known that 1015 years have elapsed. When the 2 first stars of the 7 rishis, the Great Bear, rise in the heavens, and some lunar asterism is seen at night at an equal distance between them. Then the 7 rishis continue stationary in that conjunction for 100 years of men. At the birth of Parikshit they were in Magha, and the Kali age then commenced, which consists of 1200 divine years. When the portion of Vishnu, that had been born from Vasudeva, returned to heaven, then the Kali age commenced. As long as the earth was touched by his sacred feet, the Kali age could not affect it. As soon as the incarnation of the eternal Vishnu had departed, the son of Dharma, Yudhishthira, with his brethren, abdicated the sovereignty. Observing unpropitious portents, consequent upon Krishna's disappearance, he placed Parikshit upon the throne. When the 7 rishis are in Purvashada, then Nanda will begin to reign, and thenceforward the influence of the Kali will augment. The day that Krishna shall have departed from the earth will be the first of the Kali age, the duration of which you shall hear. It will continue for 360,000 years of mortals. After 1200 divine years shall have elapsed, the Krita age shall be renewed. Thus age after age Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Sudras, excellent Brahman, men of great souls, have passed away by thousands, whose names and tribes and families I have not enumerated to you, from their great number, and the repetition of appellations it would involve. 2 persons, Devapi of the race of Puru, and Mayu of the family of Ikshwaku, through the force of devotion continue alive throughout the whole 4 ages, residing at the village of Kalapa. They will return hither in the beginning of the Krita age, and, becoming members of the family of the Manu, give origin to the Kshatriya dynasties. In this manner the earth is possessed through every series of the 3 first ages, the Krita, Treta, and Dwapara, by the sons of the Manu, and some remain in the Kali age, to serve as the rudiments of renewed generations, in the same way as Devapi and Mayu are still in existence. I have now given you a summary account of the sovereigns of the earth. To recapitulate the whole would be impossible even in 100 lives. These and other kings, who with perishable frames have possessed this ever-during world, and who, blinded with deceptive notions of individual occupation, have indulged the feeling that suggests, this earth is mine, it is my son's, it belongs to my dynasty, have all passed away. So, many who reigned before them, many who succeeded them, and many who are yet to come, have ceased, or will cease, to be. Earth laughs, as if smiling with autumnal flowers, to behold her kings unable to effect the subjugation of themselves. I will repeat to you, Maitreya, the stanzas that were chanted by earth, and which the Muni Asita communicated to Janaka, whose banner was virtue. How great is the folly of princes, who are endowed with the faculty of reason, to cherish the confidence of ambition, when they themselves are but foam upon the wave. Before they have subdued themselves, they seek to reduce their ministers, their servants, their subjects, under their authority. They then endeavor to overcome their foes. Thus, say they, will we conquer the ocean-circled earth, and, intent upon their project, behold not death, which is not far off. But what mighty matter is the subjugation of the sea-girt earth to one who can subdue himself? Emancipation from existence is the fruit of self-control. It is through infatuation that kings desire to possess me, whom their predecessors have been forced to leave, whom their fathers have not retained. Beguiled by the selfish love of sway, fathers contend with sons, and brothers with brothers, for my possession. Foolishness has been the character of every king who has boasted, All this earth is mine, everything is mine, it will be in my house forever, for he is dead. How is it possible that such vain desires should survive in the hearts of his descendants, who have seen their progenitor, absorbed by the thirst of dominion, compelled to relinquish me, whom he called his own, and tread the path of dissolution? When I hear a king sending word to another by his ambassador, "This earth is mine," immediately resign your pretensions to it. I am moved to violent laughter at first, but it soon subsides in pity for the infatuated fool. These were the verses, Maitreya, which Earth recited, and by listening to which ambition fades away like snow before the sun. I have now related to you the whole account of the descendants of the Manu, amongst whom have flourished kings endowed with a portion of Vishnu, engaged in the preservation of the earth. Whoever shall listen reverently and with faith to this narrative, proceeding from the posterity of Manu, shall be purified entirely from all his sins, and, with the perfect possession of his faculties, shall live in unequaled affluence, plenty, and prosperity. He who has heard of the races of the sun and moon, of Ikshwa.Ku, Janu, Mandatri, Sagara, and Raghu, who have all perished, of Yayati, Nashur, and their posterity, who are no more, of kings of great might, resistless valor, and unbounded wealth, who have been overcome by still more powerful time, and are now only a tale. He will learn wisdom, and forbear to call either children, or wife, or house, or lands, or wealth, his own. The arduous penances that have been performed by heroic men obstructing fate for countless years, religious rites and sacrifices of great efficacy and virtue, have been made by time the subject only of narration. The valiant Prithu traversed the universe, everywhere triumphant over his foes, yet he was blown away, like the light down of the simul tree, before the blast of time. He who was Kartavirya subdued innumerable enemies, and conquered the 7 zones of the earth, but now he is only the topic of a theme, a subject for affirmation and contradiction. Fie upon the empire of the sons of Raghu, who triumphed over Dasanana, and extended their sway to the ends of the earth, for was it not consumed in an instant by the frown of the destroyer? Mandatri, the emperor of the universe, is embodied only in a legend, and what pious man who hears it will ever be so unwise as to cherish the desire of possession in his soul? Bhagarata, Sagara, Kakastha, Dasanana, Rama, Lakshmana, Yudhishthira, and others, have been. Is it so? Have they ever really existed? Where are they now? We know not. The powerful kings who now are, or who will be, as I have related them to you, or any others who are unspecified, are all subject to the same fate, and the present and the future will perish and be forgotten, like their predecessors. Aware of this truth, a wise man will never be influenced by the principle of individual appropriation, and regarding them as only transient and temporal possessions, he will not consider children and posterity, lands and property, or whatever else is personal, to be his own.